Chapter 673. Shi Mingwan was wearing the new clothes Qiao Zhe had bought for her and carrying the new school bag Qiao Zhe had bought for her. The book inside was also bought by Qiao Zhe. The school bag was very heavy not only for this semester but also for the previous semester. Fortunately, Shi Mingwan's grades had always been good. Although she didn't study last semester, she believed that she would work hard to catch up. She was thinking about why the teacher called her today and didn't give her any homework. Instead, he asked her to read through the books that she had read before. If there was anything she didn't understand, she could look for her teacher. She was in a good mood and quickened her pace. After living in this bungalow for more than half a year, she was no longer as careless as when she first came here. Turn right, turn left. Just 3 more alleys and they would reach home. But before he got there, he heard the sounds of fighting. This area was really chaotic. Shi Mingwan couldn't help but quicken her steps. She wanted to avoid it, but she heard a familiar voice. "What? Haven't you learned your lesson from last time?" The youth's voice had already passed the stage of puberty. His voice had already begun to become clear and bright, and it was the voice she heard every day. She widened her eyes and couldn't help but stop in her tracks. She quietly walked over and hid behind the corner of the wall. She silently poked her head out. Beside the young man stood a few boys that she did not recognize. They were all about the same age as him. There were a few people lying on the ground. The leader's face was covered in blood, and the young man's foot was stepping on the man's chest. "What if you haven't learned it?" "I'll say it again. This place as well as the East Pier are all my territory. The next time you cross the border, I won't be polite anymore." The young man was already more than 1.8 meters tall and he was thin. Most of the time, although he was quiet in front of her, he was gentle. Shi Mingwan had never seen this youth before. Her heart was beating a little fast. The person he was stepping on wanted to get up. "Stinking brat, I'm telling you, don't be arrogant. Brother Liang won't let you off." "Heh." The youth laughed. It was a very arrogant laugh. He began to exert force on his leg. "Brother Liang won't let me off, right? Then let him try. Not to mention Brother Liang, even if he had the ability to call Big Boss Hui over, I wouldn't be afraid of him. Understand?" As he spoke, his foot was pressed against the man's chin. That person's neck was stepped on, and his face was filled with pain. His face, which had already been beaten into a pig's head, looked even scarier now. You, the man started to lose his breath, but the young man had no intention of letting go. Not only did he not, but he also stepped even harder. The man's eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets and he was about to stop breathing. Shi Mingwan was shocked and couldn't help but gasp. That voice was very soft, but it moved Qiao Zhe. The young man's gaze shifted over. Shi Mingwan quickly retracted her body, but she was still a step too late and was seen by the youth. The young man's expression was rather ugly. He retracted his leg, caught his breath, and coughed violently. He turned to look at the few people following him and gave them a look. Those people began to deal with the aftermath. The people lying on the ground were quickly dragged away by them. The young man's expression was solemn as he clenched his fists at his sides. He was only stunned for a few seconds before he reacted. His slender legs walked step by step in Shi Mingwan's direction. Shi Mingwan's body was trembling. In the past half a year that she had been with the young man, other than occasionally coming back with some injuries, the young man had rarely been injured in the past few days. She knew that he would fight outside, but she had never seen the young man treat others like this. It turned out that the young man wasn't uninjured. Instead, had he changed from a victim to a perpetrator? Shi Mingwan didn't dare to think about it. Her body was trembling. She didn't know what she was afraid of. However, the ruthlessness on the young man's face just now really scared her. A pair of long legs suddenly appeared in front of her eyes. She looked up along the legs and saw the young man's expressionless face. Her body actually went limp and she sat on the ground just like that. The young man wasn't in a hurry to reach out to help her up. He was already 16 years old. He was tall and thin, and one could already see the shadow of an adult on his body. He stared at her face from above, his lips opening and closing. "You saw it." Shi Mingwan instinctively wanted to shake her head, but her body was cold and she couldn't say a word. However, there was a hint of fear in her eyes as she looked at him. The young man looked at her and reached out his hand to her. Shi Mingwan's body trembled. Thinking about the scene just now, she instinctively retreated, wanting to avoid the young man's hand. Qiao Zhe narrowed his eyes, and there was a hint of danger in them. He had asked someone to think of a way to get Shi Mingwan a place to go to school because he didn't want her to stay at home every day, and he didn't want her to see him like this today. However, he didn't expect her to still see it. Looking at Shi Mingwan's avoiding gaze, He forcefully reached out his hand and took away Shi Mingwan's school bag. He carried it on his shoulder. Before she could react to what he was going to do, he bent down and picked her up. Shi Mingwan's body trembled even more, but she was familiar with the young man's embrace. She looked at the young man's handsome side profile and swallowed her saliva. The young man didn't seem to notice that something was wrong with her. He just carried her back to the bungalow where they were. After Shi Mingwan entered the door, her legs were still a little weak. The young man placed her on the sofa. Almost as soon as she was put down by him, she shrunk to the other side of the sofa. The young man suddenly moved his face closer. His big hand supported her side as he stared at her face. "Are you afraid of me?" Shi Mingwan looked at the young man's familiar face. These days they slept together every night. Sometimes when she was cold, she would wake up to find herself in the young man's arms. The environment of the bungalow was bad, but she had never been cold. She had never been hungry. She suddenly shook her head. Her movements were very gentle but firm. Before the young man could take his hand away, Shi Mingwan bit her lip and said timidly, Did you want to kill him just now?" He didn't expect her to ask such a question. The young man was stunned for a moment, then he shook his head. "No." Shi Mingwan seemed to be relieved. "You don't kill anyone, okay?" The young man looked into her eyes and caressed her face with his slender and well-defined hands. "Okay. I won't kill anyone." Shi Mingwan heaved a sigh of relief. The young man's hands were a little cold. The weather hadn't turned warm in this season. She looked at him with a hint of anticipation in her eyes. "Killing is against the law." She said this in a very low voice. The young man seemed to want to laugh, but he held it in. "Yes, killing is against the law. One really knows a lot." He was treating her like a child. Shi Mingwan gritted her teeth and suddenly raised her voice. "Don't care. If you kill someone, you'll go to prison. I won't go to see you when the time comes." She said it resolutely, but the expression in her eyes was completely different. The young man looked at her duplicitous look and raised his eyebrows. "Oh? If I go to prison, you won't come to see me?" "Of course." Shi Mingwan nodded and emphasized, "If you go to prison, I'll go home and let you be alone in the future." Her face was young and childish. The young man suddenly reached out and hugged her in his arms. "Okay, I'll listen to you." His embrace made Shi Mingwan relax. She wasn't as afraid as before, and she was no longer trembling. "Dear brother, don't do anything dangerous, okay?" The young man didn't answer her question. He just tightened his arms. Shi Mingwan had a little difficulty breathing, but she still had to say, "If you do something dangerous, what will I do?" She reached out to push him away and moved away from his arms a little. "Dear brother, if you're really locked up or if something else happens, what will I do?" After such a long time, she had run away from home. But she had never felt lonely because of him. His care and love for her made her forget the loneliness of being alone. More importantly, she realized that her dear brother was different in her heart. "Dear brother, I don't want anything to happen to you, and I don't want to be separated from you, so you have to take care of yourself, okay?" The young man looked into her eyes. Her lips opened and closed as she said words that she was worried about him. Today she saw his dark side, but she wasn't afraid, nor did she run away. He couldn't tell what he felt in his heart. Something was surging in his heart. He hugged her tightly again and buried his face in the crook of her neck. His voice was very soft as he smelled the faint fragrance of a young girl on her body. "Okay, I promise you. I'll take care of myself and won't be separated from you." "Really? Really?" Shi Mingwan raised her head and looked into the young man's eyes. Her heart had already calmed down. She bit her lip. "Dear brother, we'll always be together, right?" "Yes." The young man nodded and looked into Shi Mingwan's eyes with a focused expression. "We'll always be together." He would be with her, protect her, and not let anyone hurt her. "Dear brother." Shi Mingwan reached out and hugged the young man's waist. No matter how her dear brother treated others, as long as they could be like this forever, it would be fine. She hugged him very tightly until she saw the trace of blood on the young man's sleeve. She was shocked and forced herself not to look and not to care. She stepped back. She gestured for him to take a shower. She washed his clothes for him, so the blood stain was naturally washed away. However, even though Shi Mingwan could wash away the blood stain, it didn't mean that she could forget the young man's ruthless expression. That night she inevitably had nightmares. She dreamed that the young man was holding a knife in his hand and was constantly slashing at a person whose face couldn't be seen clearly. She screamed with all her might, trying to make the young man stop. When the young man saw her coming, he finally stopped. The young man walked towards her and told her not to be afraid. Shi Mingwan kept shaking her head. Looking at the police who rushed over, she wanted to tell the young man to leave quickly, but she couldn't say anything. She could only watch helplessly as the police took the young man away. No matter how much she cried, it was useless. At this moment, the scene in the dream changed. The young man's face became Jean Hauser. When she saw Jean Hauser again, it was through the iron window. Shi Mingwan was frightened. She wanted to pull his hand, but his figure was getting further and further away. She woke up from her dream screaming, "Dear brother, dear brother!" The scene in the dream began to enlarge, and that feeling made her fall into deep despair. She opened her eyes and was shocked by the figure at the head of the bed. When she saw clearly, she realized that the person sitting there was Jean Hauser. Jean Hauser? She wasn't fully awake yet, nor had she recovered from the dream. She suddenly saw him and she still felt like she was in a dream. Yes. In the next second, Shi Mingwan suddenly sat up and wrapped her arms around Jean Hauser's neck. She hugged him tightly. Dear brother, dear brother? When she thought of the figure in the iron window in her dream, she felt a strong sense of insecurity. She hugged him very tightly and pressed her face against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Jean Hauser let her hug him and didn't move. Shi Mingwan suddenly raised her head and kissed his lips. Her kiss was a little urgent and a little flustered. She was also a little scared. She didn't know what her dear brother had experienced all these years. What made him, a street thug, suddenly become a business elite? She also didn't know how he started the company and what hardships he had experienced. But she thought that he should be safe now, right? It shouldn't be like what she thought in her dream, right? She couldn't help but think of the last time they met. He seemed to be fighting with someone again. That made the feeling of insecurity even more obvious. Dear brother. She kissed his lips haphazardly. All her experience came from him. In this aspect she was undoubtedly clumsy. But this clumsiness made Jean Hauser lose control. Her hands tugged at his clothes. She was a little anxious. She was so anxious that she couldn't unbuckle her belt even after trying a few times. Her face was red, but at this moment, Jean Hauser turned the tables and pressed her down on the bed. It was a dark night, and the weather outside was a little gloomy. Spring had arrived and there was a lot of rain. It was accompanied by the occasional sound of spring thunder. Soon it started to rain outside. The sound of the thunderstorm covered up the sound of the collision in the room. Those emotions that were out of control also existed on such a thunderstorm night. When Shi Mingwan woke up in the morning, she thought she had a dream. She dreamed that Jean Hauser had returned and that he was fine. She dreamed that they were the same as before. She enjoyed the pleasure of being intimate. She opened her eyes, and the feeling of exhaustion and weakness in her body suddenly woke her up. It wasn't a dream. Was Jean Hauser really back? She sat up abruptly, ignoring the marks on her body and the discomfort on her body. There was no one in the room. She casually put on her clothes and went outside. Jean Hauser had just closed the door. On the dining table beside him was breakfast that had just been delivered. You're awake. Shi Mingwan blinked her eyes. Only then did she confirm that she was really not dreaming. She went forward and hugged Jean Hauser again. She rubbed her face against his chest and smelled the mint scent on his body. Her heart slowly relaxed and she finally wasn't so nervous anymore. She looked up at him and realized that he seemed to have lost a little weight. She didn't take a closer look last night, but now that it was daytime, she took a closer look and realized that Jean Hauser had lost a lot of weight. Not only had he lost weight, but he also looked a little haggard. She had many questions to ask, but in the end she could only hug him again. Thinking of his appearance, she sniffed and her eyes inexplicably felt a little hot. Jean Hauser let her hug him without moving. After a while he patted her back. Let's eat. Shi Mingwan nodded and walked to the dining table to sit down. Today wasn't the weekend and she still had to go to work. She looked up at Jean Hauser. You're back from your business trip? Can you rest for the next few days? Yes. Shi Mingwan nodded and looked at him again. Will you come back for dinner tonight? Jean Hauser looked at her. He still had a lot of things to do. He had to leave again after a few days, but, okay. She wanted to refuse, but the words that came out of her mouth became affirmative. Shi Mingwan smiled and seemed to be relieved. After dinner, Shi Mingwan went to the company. She had spent a few days to draw the work that she was going to compete in. She had named it Blue Mystery. To her, Jean Hauser was that mystery. But she wasn't in a hurry. She had the patience to slowly solve this mystery. Jean Hauser got into the car, and Tang Hua looked at him worriedly. Boss, are you okay? Jean Hauser shook his head. The car accident had caused Jean Hauser to suffer some minor injuries. However, he refused to rest for long. Instead, after he finished his matters in Qing City, he came here. He roughly knew that the person upstairs was his boss's favorite. But, boss, I'm afraid we'll have a lot of things to do in the future. Moreover, the situation is getting more and more chaotic. It's not appropriate for you to be like this now. Tang Hua had followed Zhan Haoze for a long time. In the past 10 years, what hadn't they experienced? But in the past, those undercurrents were still calm on the surface, but now it was different. Zhan Haoze's appearance in Qing City was equivalent to turning everything over to the surface. Although that car accident didn't cause much damage, it was definitely a warning. Zhan Kun wasn't dead yet, and those people below weren't honest. Not to mention that there were countless people who didn't like Zhan Haoze and wanted to get rid of him. Boss, why don't you stay away from Miss Shi for now? With their current abilities, even if they could protect Shi Mengwan, it wouldn't be good for such a big weakness to be known by others. Zhan Haoze leaned against the back of the chair with his eyes half closed. His face was gloomy and no one knew what he was thinking. He didn't say anything, so Tang Hua couldn't say much. The car drove towards the Qin Corporation's building. Just as they were about to reach the Qin Corporation's building, Zhan Haoze finally spoke. From tomorrow onwards, I'll move back to the Qin family. Boss? You've been living in the Qin family all this time. Do you think those people don't know? The problem now wasn't where he lived, but he didn't finish his sentence, but Zhan Haoze understood what he meant. His face was gloomy, and his expression looked quite solemn. Boss, just listen to me. Tang Hua had told him long ago, but Zhan Haoze had always refused. Was he still hesitating at this time? Stop talking. Boss, what will happen if you get engaged to Miss Qin? It's not like you're getting married. This period of time is just right to divert their attention. It's good for you and sister-in-law, sure. Zhan Haoze pursed his lips into a straight line, and his gaze kept looking out of the window. Seeing this, Tang Hua called out again. Chapter 674. There was silence in the car. Zhan Haoze did not respond to Tang Hua's words. He knew that Tang Hua was right. At this stage, it was best and most suitable for him to get engaged to Qin Feifei. Putting aside the fact that it could divert the attention of that group of people, the Qin family had some influence in Xi province. Qin Feifei's maternal family also had a certain background. Although Qin Yongchang was a despicable person, he truly loved his daughter. Qin Feifei wasn't Shi Mengwan. Moreover, it was just an engagement. It wouldn't affect anything. If he was rational, he would have agreed. Lowering his eyes, he rubbed his temples. Let's not talk about this anymore. Let's solve the problem in front of us first. Boss. Tang Hua felt that it was a pity. This was a really good opportunity. All right. Zhan Haoze was not only thinking about the matter in front of him, but also other things. Tell old 6 and old 7 to hurry up. He was really impatient from waiting. Understood. Tang Hua looked at Zhan Haoze's expression and felt a little uncomfortable. Boss, don't worry. It's all temporary. When our troubles are resolved, you can be with sister-in-law. It was just that the troubles in front of them were not easy to solve. He knew, and so did Zhan Haoze. The carriage fell into silence. After a long time, Zhan Haoze turned his face and looked out of the window. They had already arrived at the Qin Corporation building. Thinking of Qin Yongchang, that old fox, his face darkened. During this period of time, Qin Yongchang's movements are also very big. Be on guard. I know. Tang Hua thought of Qin Yongchang and there was a hint of disdain on his lips. However, when the car stopped, all traces of those emotions disappeared. Zhan Haoze hadn't been in Lin City for a while, so there was a pile of work that he hadn't finished dealing with. For the whole morning he was basically dealing with all kinds of official matters. Apart from the Qin Corporation's business, he was also responsible for several companies under his name. When it was almost lunchtime, Qin Feifei arrived. Brother Hao. Qin Feifei looked at Zhan Haoze and felt very wronged. Where have you been all this time? Why aren't you back yet? I went on a business trip. Zhan Haoze's voice was very soft. Qin Feifei found that it was very rare for Zhan Haoze to not smile at her for a long time, but his attitude today could be considered gentle. She was happy in her heart, and the pout on her face lessened a little. Brother Hao, do you know how much I miss you? You're always busy when I call you, and you don't reply to my messages. I almost thought something happened to you. Didn't I tell you? I'm on a business trip. Zhan Haoze looked at her. What's the matter? Can't I look for you if I have nothing to do? Qin Feifei stood in front of him. Brother Hao, you haven't eaten with me for a long time. No matter what, you have to eat with me today. I still have work here. Work, all you know is work. Qin Feifei pouted her lips. Work will never be finished. I want you to accompany me. She looked at the time and stepped forward to hold John House's hand. Let's go. It's almost time for dinner. You still have time to eat, right? Fei, let's go. Qin Fei pulled John House up. John House originally wanted to pull her hand away, but he didn't know what he thought of, but he let her pull him up and go outside. When he passed by the assistant's office, he happened to see Tang Hua. When Tang Hua saw his actions, he obviously heaved a sigh of relief. President Jean. Yes. Jean Hausa nodded. I'm going out to eat with Fei. You keep an eye on the company. Yes. Tang Hua nodded and gave Jean Hausa a look. President Jean, be careful on the road. I'm afraid there will be a traffic jam at this time. I know. Qin Fei looked at Tang Hua and then at Jean Hausa. There will be a traffic jam at this time? It can't be, right? Let's go. Jean Hausa brought Tang Hua downstairs. They went downstairs and got into the car. As expected, they saw a few tails behind them. Jean Hausa narrowed his eyes. He didn't move. When Qin Fei's face approached his arm, he didn't push her away. When they arrived at the restaurant, it was Qin Fei's favorite restaurant. After entering the door, Jean Hausa looked behind him from the corner of his eye. The car that was following them had already stopped on the opposite side of the road. There was a trace of mockery in Jean Hausa's eyes. Brother Hao, what do you want to eat? Anything is fine. Jean Hausa turned to look at Qin Fei. It was rare that he didn't give her a cold face like before. Shi Mingwan went to the studio today. After a while, she would go to France to participate in the fashion design competition. Before that, she had to arrange the content of the studio. However, today she was obviously a little absent-minded. She was thinking about what to eat tonight. She hadn't seen Jean Hausa for so long. Should she make it more grand today? With this thought in mind, Shi Mingwan couldn't help but turn on her phone. Here, she downloaded an app that specialized in teaching people how to cook. Looking at the menu inside, Shi Mingwan left the company early to buy ingredients. When she got home, she started preparing dinner. She sent a message to Jean Hausa, asking him to remember to come back for dinner. When Jean Hausa received his message, he had just driven out of the Qin Corporation's building. In the Qin Corporation's building, Jean Hausa had already gotten into the car. He was about to head in the direction of Shi Mingwan's house when he saw the people who had helped him shake off at noon following him again. Jean Hausa's face darkened. Thinking about his apartment near the company, he turned the car around and drove in the direction of the apartment. During the rush hour, the traffic was very heavy. It wasn't easy for him to shake off those 3 cars. The car drove to the apartment. Because this was a high-end residential area, cars outside couldn't enter, so Jean Hausa didn't have to worry about those people following him. After entering the underground parking lot, he went upstairs and changed his clothes. He disguised himself before going downstairs again. He changed his car and left from another exit. As expected, there were people guarding the other exit. He drove the car on the road, but the car behind him didn't move. When Jean Hausa arrived at Shi Mingwan's apartment, she had already waited for him for nearly 2 hours. Seeing Jean Hausa enter the door, Shi Mingwan's worry was half relieved, but she couldn't help but ask. You've been at work until now? Yes. Jean Hausa replied, but Shi Mingwan suddenly realized that something was wrong. Other than in bed, every time she saw Jean Hausa, he was wearing a suit and shirt. Today he was wearing a casual jacket. You didn't wear this to work this morning? Yes. Jean Hausa nodded. I accidentally poured coffee on my clothes at the company, so I changed. In fact, he had put on a beard and a hat just now, but he had removed those disguises before coming up. Shi Mingwan felt that it was a little strange, but she couldn't tell what was strange. After thinking about it, she pulled Jean Hausa's hand. Wait a moment. Dinner will be ready soon. Shi Mingwan gestured for him to wait for a while as she spoke, then she went to the kitchen. Her footsteps were a little fast. Jean Hausa didn't quite understand why she was in such a hurry until he saw the dining table. There was a candlestick on the white modern dining table. Beside the candlestick was a bouquet of white roses in an exquisite vase. It looked very festive. The tablecloths and cutlery had been laid out on both sides. From everything, it could be seen that Shi Mingwan had carefully arranged today's dinner. He still remembered the clothes she was wearing. A red, close-fitting dress. Jean Hausa couldn't help but get up and walk towards the kitchen. Shi Mingwan had just taken out the ingredients to process. When she saw him come in, her face was a little red. You go out. I'll be ready soon. With him here, she would be too embarrassed to show off. Jean Hausa stood at the door and didn't move. He just stared at his face. Shi Mingwan felt more and more uncomfortable under his gaze. She reached out to push him. Go out. Hurry up, go out. Jean Hauser pulled her hand over, lowered his head, and kissed her lips hard. He didn't go deeper and stopped after a brief kiss. I'll wait for you. He finally left the kitchen. Shi Mingwan's face was a little red and a little hot. She patted her face to let her breathing and heartbeat return to normal. She turned around, looked at the ingredients on the cooking table, and began to work. She had tried frying steak before, but the taste was really only average. She only hoped that Jean Hauser wouldn't mind. Half an hour later, Shi Mingwan brought out the fried steak, the pasta she had made, and a salad. It's ready to eat. She set everything up and looked at Jean Hauser, but he suddenly grabbed her hand. I think you've also prepared wine? What? Shi Mingwan's pretty face turned red. She had really prepared it. But when he said it directly, it gave her a feeling that he couldn't wait. She turned around shyly and took out the bottle of red wine from the wine cabinet. It's not a particularly expensive wine. She didn't know much about wine, so she just picked a relatively expensive bottle to buy. It's okay. Jean Hauser stood up and watched her prepare all of this. He resisted the urge to go forward and hug her. Instead, he opened the wine and poured it for her and himself. Shi Mingwan sat down opposite him. The dining table wasn't big. She picked up her glass and clinked glasses with him. Jean Hauser took the glass from her hand and stared at her face with a burning gaze. What's wrong? Shi Mingwan felt uncomfortable under his gaze. Is there something on my face? No. Jean Hauser shook his head and gently clinked glasses with her. I just have something to tell you. What? What was it that made her so serious? From tomorrow onwards, our company has a lot of things to do. I might not be able to come here every day. He was able to leave his home and come here successfully today because those people hadn't reacted yet. Once they reacted, it wouldn't be so simple. You can't come here every day? Shi Mingwan bit her lip, as if she was thinking about the meaning behind his words. Then how long will it take? Jean Hauser didn't say anything. He wasn't willing to give her a promise. It'll take some time. Shi Mingwan lowered her head and took a sip of wine. She didn't know much about wine, but now she felt that this wine was a little bitter. Yes, did you encounter any problems? Jean Hauser looked at her and shook his head gently. It's just ordinary work. I'll be fine after I'm done with this. Oh. Shi Mingwan didn't know what else to say. Let's eat. The meal was very quiet. Shi Mingwan even forgot to light the candle on the candlestick. She sat there, feeling inexplicably depressed. However, when she looked at Jean Hauser's overly handsome facial features, she suppressed the depression in her heart. It didn't matter. There were also times when she didn't care about anything when she drew. This was just right. She was going to France to compete in a while, so it was good to take this time to prepare more. Although she thought so in her heart, her face still showed a reluctant expression. The food in front of her seemed to have become tasteless. The moment Jean Hauser raised his head, he saw her expression. He picked up the wine and took a sip. He stood up and walked in front of her. He picked her up and placed her on his lap. Unhappy? No. Jean Hauser turned her face and looked at her. Shi Mingwan bit her lip. If you want to be busy, go ahead. It just so happens that I have something to do too. So, I've been very busy recently. She blinked. For some reason, she just felt that Jean Hauser wasn't telling the truth. But she didn't need him to tell the truth now. I'm going to France to compete next month. It just so happens that I need to prepare well during this period of time. Why don't you not come until I come back from France? With such a long time, it would be enough for him to finish his work, right? At this moment, her lips were suddenly kissed by Jean Hauser. He grabbed her waist and easily put his hand under the hem of her red dress. Shi Mingwan looked at him and reached out to wrap her arms around his neck. Not here. However, Jean Hauser didn't listen to her. He gently bit her lips and let go. Just here. His lips moved bit by bit to her ear. Not just here. There's also the kitchen, the living room, and the bathroom. Today we'll do it in every place. Shi Mingwan felt her face burning. The hint in his words almost made her unable to control herself. This man didn't speak much, but the things he did and the words he occasionally said always made her feel that he was so indecent. However, she soon didn't have the energy to think more. Her body was squeezed open by him bit by bit. Her consciousness began to drift away from the ninth heaven. When Jean Hauser left Shi Mingwan's apartment, he put on his disguise again. He returned to his apartment at dawn. When he entered the apartment, he was not surprised to see the few cars waiting for him at the entrance of the neighborhood last night. There was a flash of darkness in his eyes. After entering the door, he removed his disguise and took out his phone to make a call. The other party only asked someone to follow him, but he didn't ask anyone to make a move. What did that mean? Was he looking for an opportunity, or did he want to play a bigger game? No matter which it was, he would accompany him to the end. The moment the call was connected, he walked to the balcony and looked down at the few cars below. Help me do something. After hanging up the phone, his fingertips accidentally touched the photo album. There was a photo on it that had just been taken today. The faint light of the morning shone on Shi Mingwan's face. She was sleeping on the bed, her entire person peaceful and quiet. After staring at the photo for a while, Zhang Haoze saved the photo into an encrypted document. He put the phone aside. Shi Mingwan didn't expect Zhang Haoze to really not appear. When she woke up, he was already gone. There was still the dinner left by the two of them yesterday on the table. However, there was no trace of Zhang Haoze in the room. He didn't even buy her breakfast like usual. Her body was a little sore and uncomfortable. She sat on the sofa, curled her legs and hugged her knees. She looked at the messy dining table for a long time and suddenly smiled. It wasn't like they hadn't been separated before. Why did she make it seem like they were separated forever this time? Shi Mingwan, don't be so pretentious. After a while, when Zhang Haoze is done with his work, he will come to find you. In the next half a month, she didn't see Zhang Haoze. He really didn't appear. Shi Mingwan's entry was almost ready. In a week, she would fly to France. Before that, Shi Mingwan went to Rong City to see Su Qingsang. Su Qingsang had been asking her to play since she went to Rong City in January, but Shi Mingwan wasn't free before. When she went to Rong City, Su Qingsang put down her work to play with her. In the evening, she also took her to meet Hu Jinyao's group of childhood friends. Unexpectedly, Zhang Haoze's childhood friend, Wan Xianyang, seemed to be interested in her. Before the party ended, he kept asking for her contact information. For Su Qingsang's sake, she didn't want to refuse too obviously. She had no choice but to give him her WeChat. In the next 2 days, Wan Xianyang contacted her time and time again, saying that he wanted to be her director. Shi Mingwan had Su Qingsang to accompany her, so she pushed him away if she could. When she really couldn't push him away, she would call Su Qingsang along. Fortunately, Hu Jinyao's friends were all good. Although Wan Xianyang's intentions were obvious, he didn't go too far. This also made Shi Mingwan heave a sigh of relief. After playing in Rong City for a few days, Shi Mingwan prepared to go to France. The visa and procedures were all done. Although she was a little reluctant to part with Su Qingsang, Shi Mingwan still returned to Lin City first. After returning home, Shi Mingwan called Zhang Haoze, but no one answered. She could only send a message instead. There was no reply. 2 days before going to France, Shi Mingwan went home to visit her parents. She told them that she was going to France. Although Shi Mingwan was worried, she had no reason to object to what her daughter wanted to do. Shi Mingwan accompanied her parents for a day. Before boarding the plane, she called Zhang Haoze again, but no one answered. After boarding the plane, Shi Mingwan took out her phone to look at the local news while waiting for the plane to take off. However, she saw such a piece of news on the public account of a certain news outlet. Mr. Zhang Haoze, a rising star in the city's technology industry, and Qin Feifei, the daughter of the Qin Corporation, held an engagement ceremony yesterday. Below was a detailed introduction about Zhang Haoze's identity and Qin Feifei's identity. There was also the situation of yesterday's engagement ceremony. Finally, was a company like the Qin Corporation also going to start entering the technology field? The accompanying picture was of Zhang Haoze, Qin Feifei and Qin Yongchang's face. Chapter 675. Shi Mingwan sat there with her hand tightly gripping her phone. Her heart was beating very fast. She tried her best to remain calm, but it was very difficult. Love fascinates people. Love makes people dizzy. She was blinded by love. She trusted Zhang Haoze blindly. His heart felt like it had been lightly stabbed by someone and it hurt slightly. Feeling a little uncomfortable, she put down the phone and clutched her chest. Every scene and every moment after her reunion with Zhang Haoze appeared in her mind one by one. She pressed on the position of her heart to calm herself down. Shi Mingwan, you are going to participate in the competition now. Let's talk about these matters of love when you come back. The plane landed. Assistant Xiao Ji and designer Tong Yan came to pick her up. This time, she was participating in the competition in the name of her studio. Apart from herself, she let little Ji and Tong Yan come over first to play the vanguard. Sister Shi, are you too tired from the flight? Xiao Ji had arrived the day before. She had come in advance and arranged a car. Now that he saw Shi Mingwan's expression wasn't good, he thought that she was too tired from the long flight. Not bad. How have you been these 2 days? Not bad. The one who spoke was Tong Yan. She had been here for 2 days and looked around. This is indeed the fashion capital. It's quite rewarding. Well, it's good that we got something. Let's go back to the hotel first. Shi Mingwan sorted out her emotions in just a few sentences. She wasn't alone. She had more important things to do right now. After getting into the car, Shi Mingwan and Tong Yen talked about the competition again. The fashion design competition was held in Paris, the fashion capital. When Tong Yen arrived, there were already quite a number of participants. It was a gathering of designers from more than a dozen countries around the world. Among the people who came, there were already those who had passed the preliminary round. Next was the semi-finals and the finals. Every match had a theme. In order to complete the work, it had to fit the theme of the competition. Then, from these works that fit the theme, the judges would pick out the 10 that they felt were the best. Then the finals would be held among these 10 people. The semi-finals and finals would last for half a month. In other words, they had to stay in France for half a month. Shi Mingwan knew about this before. Although she didn't know what the next 2 topics were, she was confident in herself. Little G was booked into a hotel near the competition venue. Little G shared a room with Tong Yen. Shi Mingwan's room was right next to theirs. After entering the door, she motioned for them to rest for a while. She wanted to take a shower and change her clothes. When the door closed, Shi Mingwan was left alone. She finally didn't have to hide her emotions anymore. Throwing herself on the bed, Shi Mingwan's mood was extremely low. The afternoon of the second day Shi Mingwan arrived was the time to announce the theme of the semi-finals. After the announcement, all the contestants would be given 3 days to submit their works. 3 days later, the judges would use 1 day to vote and announce the list of people who had passed the semi-finals. Then the submission time for the finalists was 7 days. The time given to the designer was quite short. Therefore, the organizing committee of the semi-finals did not require the contestants to design the finished product. Instead, they only required the contestants to draw the design. However, the works to be submitted in the finals included the design drawings, the source of the design, and the finished product. Of course, all the materials needed for the finals would be provided by the organizing committee. When Shi Mingwan appeared in front of Xiao Ji and Tong Yen again, she looked radiant again. She put on makeup and went to the organizing committee to fill in the form and get back the theme. The theme of this season is sweet. When she saw this theme, Shi Mingwan felt a little dizzy. She couldn't be sweet at all now. After she came to France, it wasn't that she hadn't thought of calling Jean Hausa. She wanted to ask him what was going on. How could he be engaged to another woman? But her dignity didn't allow her to ask. She retracted her thoughts and looked at the requirements on the design theme. Shi Mingwan bit her lip. Was it sweet? 3 o'clock was very tight. It was so tight that Shi Mingwan didn't have time to think about why Jean Hausa was engaged to another woman. In the past 3 days she had hardly left her room. Every day she had been drawing. After 3 days, Shi Mingwan submitted the design draft. Before the judges voted, Shi Mingwan, who was extremely tired, told Tong Yen and Xiao Ji not to disturb her and slept for the whole day. Later she was woken up by a knock on the door. She got up and looked at the time. It was already night time. She had slept for a while and her spirit had recovered quite well. It was just that she felt hungry after sleeping for too long. She was thinking about going downstairs to eat something later when there was a knock on the door again. She thought it was Xiao Ji or Tong Yen. She didn't expect to open the door and see Wan Xianying standing outside. "It's you?" Shi Mingwan had just woken up. Her hair was messy and her clothes were a little wrinkled. In such a state, it was completely unsuitable for her to meet guests. She resisted the urge to close the door and took a small step back. "Good evening, Mingwan." "Hello." Shi Mingwan's expression didn't look that good. "What's the matter?" Wan Xianying stood at the door. "Aren't you going to invite me in for a seat?" "It's not convenient." Shi Mingwan's words were a little heartless. Looking at Wan Xianying, it was obvious that he had come to look for her. "Okay. It's fine." Wan Xianying wasn't angry. He placed his hand behind him. On it was a bouquet of extremely beautiful heart-shaped roses. Shi Mingwan was a little embarrassed. "Wan Xianying." "Flowers for a beauty." Wan Xianying forcefully handed the flowers to Shi Mingwan. "You haven't eaten, have you? If you don't mind, how about having dinner with me?" Shi Mingwan wanted to refuse, but Wan Xianying spoke slyly. "I asked the waiter. They said that you haven't gone downstairs all day. You didn't order food either, so you should be hungry, right?" Shi Mingwan's brows furrowed, but Wan Xianying seemed to know what she was thinking. "I'm sorry, I made my own decision. However, the owner of this hotel is a friend of mine, so he gave me some convenience. His attitude was quite sincere. Shi Mingwan couldn't even find a reason to refuse. There's no hurry. Wan Xinying was quite gentlemanly. I'll wait for you. As he spoke, he took the initiative to take a step back. With a faint smile on his face, he raised his hand gently and gestured for Shi Mingwan to help herself. Shi Mingwan closed the door in a dilemma. She looked at the large bouquet of roses in her hand and placed it on the coffee table. After staring at the bouquet of flowers for nearly a minute, Shi Mingwan suddenly smiled. Forget it, it was just a meal. Moreover, Wan Xinying was Hu Jinyao's childhood friend. She would have a meal with him and then explain things clearly. Even if she wasn't with Zhang Haoze, she didn't have the intention to start a new relationship for the time being. He cleaned himself up as fast as he could and changed his clothes. When Shi Mingwan came out of the room, she was not surprised to see Wan Xinying's stunned gaze. How about French food? Wan Xinying suggested. Shi Mingwan felt that it was too long, but Wan Xinying smiled. You came to France to participate in the competition. I think you haven't tried authentic French food during this period of time, right? Shi Mingwan indeed hadn't. She realized that Wan Xinying was indeed a businessman. His ability to be watertight was even better than Shao Qi's. Let's go. I know there's a Michelin-starred restaurant that tastes pretty good. It's nearby. Half an hour later, Shi Mingwan and Wan Xinying sat in the restaurant. The environment in front of them was quite good. Shi Mingwan's nervous mood these few days was more or less relaxed because of this elegant environment. I came to France that year and accidentally discovered this restaurant. Later, as long as I came to France, I would definitely come. Shi Mingwan heard Wan Xinying speak French to the waiter quite well. Her French wasn't very good, so she could only understand some simple greetings. Do you come to France often? He spoke French so fluently. Often. Wan Xinying nodded and moved his body slightly closer. Do you know why? Shi Mingwan shook her head. She knew that Hu Jinyao was very rich. His friend wasn't a simple person. I told you last time that our family is in the antique business. You also know that over the years, there have been a lot of treasures in our country that have been lost outside. So every time there's an auction here, I'll come over. Shi Mingwan looked at Wan Xinying and her impression of him changed. I didn't know that you were quite patriotic. How should I put it? Those patriotic overseas Chinese are very dedicated to these things. So I'll do my best. Shi Mingwan nodded. She wasn't familiar with Wan Xinying, and Wan Xinying didn't mention what had happened before. He only talked about some of the things he had encountered at the auction. This was a field that Shi Mingwan had never come into contact with before. It was quite new to her. For a moment, she actually felt that listening to Wan Xinying's words was quite interesting. French cuisine was famous for taking a long time. Shi Mingwan didn't feel bored after eating the meal. Her nerves, which hadn't been able to relax from rushing to draw, were also relaxed a lot because of this delicious meal. After coming out of the restaurant, Shi Mingwan looked at Wan Xinying and thanked him very seriously. Wan Xinying, thank you. Thank me for what? Wan Xinying looked at her with a mischievous smile in his eyes. Thank me for treating you to a meal? You don't have to thank me. You can treat me tomorrow. Okay. Shi Mingwan didn't refuse. She should have treated him back. The weather is good today. Do you want to take a walk? Shi Mingwan wanted to refuse, but Wan Xinying made a gesture of invitation. She thought for a moment and followed beside him. Okay. The temperature in Paris was still very low at this season. It was only in the teens. Lin City was already in the 30s. But Paris was so cold. Shi Mingwan really wasn't used to it. Tightening the coat on her body, Shi Mingwan couldn't be happy when she thought that she would have to stay here for a few more days. Mingwan. Wan Xinying took off his windbreaker and was about to put it on her. Shi Mingwan was shocked and subconsciously took a step back. Wan Xinying's action of holding the coat stopped in midair. He looked at Shi Mingwan as if he knew that he was being abrupt. Sorry, I just thought that you would be cold. I'm not cold. Shi Mingwan felt that it was time to make things clear to Wan Xinying. Wan Xinying. She stood at the intersection and looked at his face under the street lamp. Seriously speaking, Wan Xinying wasn't bad looking, had good qualifications and was a good person. But sometimes, feelings really couldn't be explained clearly. Wan Xinying. I know that it might not be appropriate for me to say this. You might even think that I'm being self-sentimental, but I really want to say that the two of us aren't suitable. Wan Xinying didn't expect her to be so direct. He was a little surprised, but after the surprise, there was a faint smile on his face. Are you rejecting me? I guess so. Shi Mingwan nodded. I just don't want you to waste time on me. You're not me. How do you know that I'm wasting time? But I don't like you. Shi Mingwan was very direct. Her personality was like this. If she liked him, then she liked him. If she didn't like him, then she didn't like him. Wan Xinying took a step forward and looked at Shi Mingwan's face. Before he came, he specially asked Su Qingsang to do his homework and asked a lot of people. Everything that happened today, whether it was what flowers to send or where to eat, he had carefully arranged everything. However, he didn't expect such a result. You don't like me, but I like you. I think that's enough. Maybe one day you'll like me? That's impossible. Shi Mingwan's words were quite absolute. Wan Xinying looked at her. Do you have someone you like? Yes. Do I know him? No. Wan Xinying looked at her and suddenly said, You didn't deliberately make up such a person to make me give up, did you? No. Shi Mingwan didn't want to say more. Anyway, I have someone I like. I can't forget him in a short period of time, so don't waste time on me. There's something wrong with your argument. Wan Xinying waved his hand and didn't take her words to heart at all. If I don't succeed with you in the end, it'll be a waste of time. But if I move you in the end and you get together with me, it'll be worth it. How can it be a waste of time? Wan Xinying? Shi Mingwan was speechless by his words. Alright, it's getting late. I'll send you back to rest. Wan Xinying. Let's go. Wan Xinying obviously didn't want to listen to her, so Shi Mingwan didn't say anything else. The two of them walked back along the road. Wan Xinying looked at the hotel building not far away in front of them. His attitude was different from yesterday. When they were about to reach the hotel, Shi Mingwan's foot suddenly tripped over something and she was about to fall. Wan Xinying supported her body in time. Are you okay? I'm fine. Shi Mingwan stood firm and was glad that she didn't wear high heels today. Thank you. Mingwan, you don't have to be so polite to me. Wan Xinying was serious for a while before he became a little sloppy again. Shi Mingwan seemed to be used to him being like this, so she wasn't very surprised. She stood properly and didn't refuse when Wan Xinying said that he wanted to send her back to her room. Mingwan, can I still come to see you tomorrow? I have something to do tomorrow. Tomorrow was the announcement of the shortlist. Only 10 people could be shortlisted. 1 week after the shortlist, she could bring 2 assistants to the venue specially arranged for the finalists. Whether she could be shortlisted or not, she would only know tomorrow. If she could, then she would naturally be busy next. If she couldn't, then she would really be free. It's okay. I know you're here for the competition. I can wait for you to finish the competition. Shi Mingwan didn't reply. After saying goodbye to Wan Xinying, she entered the room. She walked to the sofa and sat down. Looking at the big bouquet of roses, her emotions were very complicated. She couldn't help but think of Zhang Haoze again. During the time she was with him, Zhang Haoze didn't seem to have given her roses. She sighed in her heart. Actually, it didn't matter what he gave her. It was only at this time that she could tell that Zhang Haoze really didn't have her in his heart. Otherwise, why would he be engaged to another woman? She got up to take a shower and rest. There was a knock on the door. She thought it was Wan Xinying who had returned. Without much hesitation, she went forward and opened the door. When she saw who the tall figure outside the door was, she closed the door without hesitation. However, her movements were still a beat too slow. Before she closed the door, Zhang Haoze entered the door first. Without saying a word, Shi Mingwan began to push her away, trying to push her out. Zhang Haoze easily pulled her hands into his arms and turned around. At the same time the door was closed, her body was also pressed against the door. Shi Mingwan was anxious. She raised her foot and kicked Zhang Haoze. Zhang Haoze held her hand and wanted to block her foot. She struggled very hard, so he wasn't paying attention and was actually kicked by her. After the kick, Shi Mingwan used even more force. She raised her other foot and kicked him. Although she wasn't wearing high heels, she was wearing a pair of pointed shoes today. It was also very painful to kick someone. Zhang Haoze was kicked twice by her. When she was about to kick him for the 3rd time, he lifted her body up. In 3 steps, he carried her body to the side of the bed and threw her down. The soft bed made Shi Mingwan's body bounce a few times. Just as she steadied herself, she raised her foot and kicked his body again. Shi Mingwan, what are you doing? Even Zhang Haoze couldn't help but press down on her body. He pressed down tightly and didn't let her move anymore. He held her hands together and raised them above his head, looking into her eyes. What are you doing? He had been very busy during this period of time. When he had some time to look for her, he realized that Shi Mingwan wasn't at home. She had gone abroad to participate in some competition. Am I messing around? Yes, if I'm messing around, you can go find someone who doesn't mess around. Shi Mingwan glared at him with a gloomy gaze. Jean Hausa, get lost. I don't want to see you. Jean Hausa's brows were tightly furrowed. Looking at the anger on Shi Mengwan's face, he seemed to be a little puzzled. Are you angry that I haven't come to see you during this period of time? Who's angry? Shi Mengwan didn't want to talk to him anymore. I don't have time to be angry with you. Get out of the way. I said I don't want to see you. Shi Mengwan? Shi Mengwan closed her eyes. Yes, she should have understood long ago. Look at how Jean Hausa addressed her. He had always called her by her full name. Did he really have feelings for her? Did he really like her? Did he really love her? I'll say it again. Jean Hausa, get out. Chapter 676. I do. Jean Hausa didn't believe her at all. He only felt that Shi Mengwan's actions were because he hadn't come to see her for a long time and was throwing a tantrum. Call me. This person. Really. Shi Mengwan suddenly pressed the 3 numbers. After pressing it, the moment the call was connected, she spoke in fluent English. Hello, I'm at XX Hotel Room 13. Before she could finish her sentence, the phone was snatched away by Jean Hausa. He looked at her and couldn't believe that she was serious. Shi Mengwan? Do you know what you're doing? Of course I know what I'm doing. It's someone who doesn't know what I'm doing. It's you. She glared at Jean Hausa. She had been suppressing her uncomfortable emotions for the past few days. At this moment she didn't want to suppress them anymore. Jean Hausa, is it fun to be two-timing? Is it fun to bully me like this? As she spoke, the great anger from when she knew that he was engaged surged in her heart. Without thinking, she raised her foot and kicked him again. Jean Hausa, who was shocked by Shi Mengwan's words just now, was still thinking about her words. He didn't pay attention and actually let Shi Mengwan kick him. Jean Hausa was kicked and had no choice but to leave her body. Shi Mengwan took this opportunity to quickly get up from the bed and dodge to the side. She sat up and looked at Jean Hausa with a defensive expression and resentment. Jean Hausa, you can't bully me like this. Perhaps because she had suppressed it for too long, Shi Mengwan's tone was filled with grievance. But very quickly she suppressed this grievance. Let bygones be bygones. But now she didn't want to continue like this. Leave. I don't want to see you. As she spoke, she pointed at the door, wanting Jean Hausa to get lost. Jean Hausa sat on the bed and didn't move. His brows furrowed slightly as if he had thought of something. Two-timing? Oh. At this time he was still playing dumb. Shi Mengwan nodded and went forward to take the phone. After taking the phone, she quickly retreated, as if she wasn't afraid that Jean Hausa would pounce on her. She turned on the phone and found yesterday's news. She directly placed it in front of Jean Hausa. On the phone screen, Jean Hausa stood with Chen Feifei, while Qin Yongchang stood beside Chen Feifei. The 3 of them smiled brightly. The accompanying article was the news of their engagement. Shi Mengwan's gaze was slightly cold as she stared straight at Jean Hausa. Now that things had come to this, what else could he say? He said that there was nothing between him and Chen Feifei. He asked her to give him time. She believed him, gave him time, and the result? Jean Hausa's eyes darkened when he saw the photo. He knew about this photo. He also knew about this news, but he didn't expect Shi Mengwan to see it. Nothing to say? If you have nothing else to say, then leave. She didn't want to hear it from him either. It was true that she longed for love and wanted to be with him. But she didn't want to be looked down upon. She didn't want to be a shameful mistress. Even if according to the chronological order she should have arrived first. She casually threw her phone aside. Shi Mengwan still had things to do tomorrow, so she didn't want to waste her time with Jean Hausa. Leave. Jean Hausa got up and got out of bed. Shi Mengwan thought that he was going to leave, but he walked to her side and hugged her. Jean Hausa. He didn't want to use this trick all the time. Shi Mengwan struggled up and raised her foot to kick Jean Hausa again. He dodged this kick, and Shi Mengwan used her elbow to hit his abdomen. She heard a muffled groan. She didn't stop. She didn't use much strength. What was he doing? However, when she saw Jean Hausa bend down, she thought he was pretending. Jean Hausa, go out. I don't want to see you. Jean Hausa didn't say anything. His hand kept covering his abdomen, and his face seemed to be in pain. Shi Mengwan was still calm at first, but when she saw that he was really in pain, she couldn't hold back the coldness on her face anymore. Stop pretending. If you're fine, go out. I don't want to see you. Jean Hausa shook his head. He reached out to hug her. Only then did Shi Mengwan remember the situation in front of her and pushed him hard again. He was pushed back a step by her, and his back hit the edge of the table in the hotel room. Shi Mengwan's lips moved. She wanted to say that she should be careful, but she thought that she didn't have much strength at all. He must be pretending. But when she saw the blood flowing out from between Jean House's fingers, she was shocked and went forward without thinking. "Are you hurt?" Jean House raised his head and looked at her. Ignoring the blood on his body, he reached out and hugged her. "Jean House, you." What was he doing at a time like this? "I'm not engaged to her." Although everyone thought that way, this engagement was the wishful thinking of the Qin father and daughter. In the past half a month there had been frequent movements. Some were aimed at him and some were aimed at Qin Feifei. It was fine to target Qin Feifei, but there was only one. After all, Qin Feifei's uncle was quite powerful in Xi province. However, there were many movements aimed at him. Before he decided to come to France, half of it was because he did it on purpose, and the other half was because he wanted to divert the other party's attention. Therefore, when the other party came looking for him, he didn't avoid it. Instead, he directly accepted the other party's provocation. He deliberately took the knife in his stomach. The strength and direction were calculated accurately. It wouldn't be fatal, but he would suffer a little. Sure enough, after he was injured, the other party's movements immediately stopped. He probably didn't expect him to be so weak, that he would be injured so easily. It was also because he was injured that the other party's movements stopped. That was why he had the time to come to France to look for Shi Mengwan. However, he didn't expect Shi Mengwan to have such a reaction when he came. "Where are you hurt?" Shi Mengwan didn't want to care about whether he was engaged or not. She remembered that he was very skilled. Ordinary people shouldn't be able to hurt him, so how did he get injured? "It's a small injury." "Since it's a small injury, let's go." Shi Mengwan retreated from his arms and didn't look at him at all. "Get out." Jean House let go of his hand and looked at his abdomen. He came to France and was wearing a casual suit. Inside was a beige shirt. The shirt was already stained with blood, and blood leaked out from between his fingers. Shi Mengwan turned her face away and wanted to say, "Get out," again. However, her absent-minded mind took a step forward and walked in front of Jean House. She bent down and took Jean House's hand away. She unbuttoned his shirt. She saw that there was a circle of gauze wrapped around his abdomen. The gauze was now completely red. She pursed her lips into a straight line and stared at the wound for a long time. She turned around and pressed the front desk to ask them to send the first aid kit up. When the other party asked if he needed a doctor, she thought about it and agreed. When the doctor came, she asked Jean House to lie down. "Don't stand. Lie down. The doctor will be here later." "You're not going to chase me away?" Jean House's words made Shi Mengwan look sideways. She stared at his face for a long time and finally shook her head. "After the doctor sees your injury, you can leave." 1-1. Jean House's address made Shi Mengwan's heart tremble. It seemed that ever since the two of them got together, he hadn't called her name like this. "I'm not engaged to Qin Feifei." Shi Mengwan lowered her head in disbelief. Jean House took 2 steps forward to approach her, but she raised her hand. "Don't move. Lie down." The worry in her eyes was too obvious. Jean House looked at her for a while, then finally listened to her and lay down on the bed. His hand was still pressed on the wound. It was no longer bleeding. Soon the hotel waiter brought a doctor up. Shi Mengwan was worried that Jean House's injury was too serious and that she wouldn't be able to handle it well. When the doctor arrived, she heaved a sigh of relief. The doctor untied the gauze on Jean House's waist. Only then did Shi Mengwan see that there was a wound about 5 centimeters long on his abdomen. The wound had already been stitched up, but it was still bleeding faintly. She wasn't sure if it was because she had pushed him just now or something else. At this moment, her eyes were a little red. The doctor treated Jean House's wound again and bandaged it. Finally, he gave some instructions on what to take note of. What surprised Shi Mengwan was that Jean House could actually speak fluent French. This made her unable to help but look sideways. After sending the doctor away, Shi Mengwan asked the waiter to change the blood-stained bedsheets. She looked at Jean House and wanted to chase him away. Jean House had already laid down on the bed first. Shi Mengwan took 2 steps forward. "Jean House, you can't sleep here." "You, 1-1." Jean House reached out and held her hand. He looked at her with his usual cold face, but there was a hint of gentleness and fatigue in his eyes. "I'm very tired." During this period of time, apart from those people who wanted to deal with him in the open and in the dark, he had also suffered a lot of interference in his work. Whether it was in Lin City or Qing City, he still had a lot of things to do. However, because he hadn't seen her for a long time, he ignored the injuries on his body and flew for more than 10 hours to see her. He didn't rest on the plane. Instead, he dealt with some very important business matters first. This time he was really tired. Wan, let me sleep for a while. When he said this, Shi Mingwan finally noticed that other than the injuries on his body, there was a faint shadow under his eyes. Her lips moved. She wanted herself to be more heartless and harden her heart, but she couldn't do it no matter what. She could only watch as Zhang Haoze closed his eyes. His hand was still holding her hand. Sleep with me for a while, okay? Zhang Haoze didn't even open his eyes. He just held Shi Mingwan's hand and didn't let go. Shi Mingwan stood by the bed and looked at Zhang Haoze, who seemed to have lost a little weight. She didn't sleep as he wished. Instead, she withdrew her hand and took a step back. Zhang Haoze looked at her with half-opened eyes. At this moment, Zhang Haoze unexpectedly made Shi Mingwan feel fragile. Fragile? How was that possible? That was definitely not an emotion that should appear on Zhang Haoze. In her heart, this person was similar to a robot. How could he be fragile? Wan? He called her again. This time, Shi Mingwan decided not to be affected by him. She turned around and went straight to the bathroom. Her footsteps were very fast. After entering the bathroom, she quickly closed the door. She placed her hands on the edge of the sink and stared at her face in the mirror. Don't be soft-hearted. Don't believe it. That man was already someone else's now. If you were soft-hearted, it would be equivalent to harming yourself again. No, absolutely not. Shi Mingwan was in a bad mood. She took more than 10 minutes to take a shower than usual before coming out. She was wrapped in a hotel bathrobe. When she saw Zhang Haoze, his eyes were tightly closed. His breathing was long and balanced as if he had really fallen asleep. Shi Mingwan walked to the bedside and stood still, staring at Zhang Haoze's face. Many thoughts flashed through her mind, such as shaking him awake and telling him to leave. Or perhaps she simply went to get another room. However, when she saw the injury on Zhang Haoze's abdomen, she temporarily put down those thoughts and suppressed them. She closed her eyes and finally lay down beside him helplessly. She stared at the side of Zhang Haoze's face, unable to calm down. Shi Mingwan thought that she wouldn't be able to sleep, and she also thought that she would toss and turn for the whole night. But in reality she slept very soundly. No matter how much she didn't want to deny it, she couldn't escape the reality in her heart. Where Zhang Haoze was, she could always sleep more peacefully. Early morning. Shi Mingwan woke up. When she opened her eyes, she saw Zhang Haoze's enlarged face in front of her. He was staring at her. At the same time that she woke up, he lowered his head and kissed her lips. Shi Mingwan subconsciously avoided him. She looked at him and moved her body to the side. Zhang Haoze supported himself with one hand on the bed. He looked at her movements and moved a little in her direction. Shi Mingwan quickly got up and sat 2 arms away from him. Her gaze shifted slightly to prevent herself from looking at him. Your injury should be fine now. You can leave. Shi Mingwan didn't plan to continue like this. Her body moved, but before she could leave, she was already pressed down by Zhang Haoze. In the next second she was pressed down by him. Wan, I'm not engaged. He looked into her eyes and said very seriously. His eyes were deep and focused. To her they were fatally attractive. She knew that what he said might not be the truth, and she didn't intend to believe him. She wanted to struggle, but when she thought that Zhang Haoze was injured, she could only stop. Really? Does it have anything to do with me? Shi Mingwan forced herself to turn her face away. Who are you to me? Whether you're engaged or not, and which woman you're with, you don't need to tell me. Zhang Haoze's brows furrowed slightly. Wan, don't call me. Shi Mingwan seemed to have made up her mind. She turned around and looked at him. Zhang Haoze, you said that you're not engaged? Yes. You said that you have nothing to do with Qin Feifei? Yes. Then tell me, who am I to you? Zhang Haoze paused for a moment and looked at Shi Mingwan's delicate and beautiful face. He said 3 words very slowly, girlfriend. I'm your girlfriend? Yes. Was she not? Okay. You said I'm your girlfriend. Shi Mingwan suddenly reached out to hold his face and looked into his eyes very seriously. Then do you dare to publicize our relationship? Publicize it to the entire Lin city. Tell everyone that you're my man and I'm your woman? Do you dare? Do you dare to let everyone know that I'm your girlfriend? Chapter 677. In a quiet room, 2 men were lying on the same bed. One was on top and the other was on bottom. The posture was ambiguous, but the atmosphere was completely different. Zhang Haoze didn't expect Shi Mingwan to ask such a question. The air suddenly became silent. He still had an injury on his abdomen. After supporting himself like this for a long time, it caused a slight throbbing pain. His expression changed slightly because of the pain. In Shi Mingwan's eyes, this change directly became proof that he didn't want to admit his identity. Shi Mingwan sneered. It seemed that she was no exception to this result. She let go of her hand and gently pushed him to the side. She was about to get up when Zhang Haoze grabbed her hand again. 1-1. Let go. It's not what you think. Zhang Haoze rarely explained to others. His brothers had been with him for a long time. There were many things that he didn't need to say or explain. They would directly execute them and very few people would question his words. Then what is it? Tell me, I'll listen. Shi Mingwan waited for him to explain. Even if she really wanted to be with him, she hoped that she could understand his thoughts. Even if they couldn't be together, she hoped that the breakup could be done cleanly. Zhang Haoze had been supporting himself for a long time. At this moment he simply sat up and pulled her to sit up with him. His movements affected his wound. He snorted in a very low voice. Shi Mingwan seemed to have only realized at this moment that Zhang Haoze was injured. She turned her face away and forced herself not to soften and not to give in. 1-1, I can't disclose our relationship for the time being. Shi Mingwan sneered and turned her face away. She felt that it was a matter of course. She knew that this person was just saying it to sound nice. I'm sorry. Zhang Haoze rarely said sorry to anyone. There were even fewer women who could make him say sorry. Zhang Haoze thought of Zhang Kuan, the Zhang family in Qing City, and his current situation. He closed his eyes. Qin Feifei has heart disease. She can't stand stimulation. I owe her father a debt of gratitude. So, I can't leave the Qin family for the time being. Shi Mingwan turned around and looked at Zhang Haoze. She just stared at him. She has heart disease. She likes you and wants to be engaged to you, so you agreed? I didn't agree. In fact, ever since Qin Feifei had a relapse, Qin Yongchang had been wanting them to get engaged. But he didn't agree. He didn't want to agree either. But later Qin Feifei was almost attacked. Qin Feifei was scared half to death because of this. Her heart wasn't good to begin with, so Qin Yongchang decided to get them engaged. But perhaps she was afraid that he would be unhappy if he knew. Qin Yongchang didn't tell him. Instead, he said that the Qin Corporation was holding an anniversary meeting. The Qin Corporation's anniversary celebration was around the same time. As the general manager of the Qin Corporation, it was impossible for Zhang Haoze not to attend. When he went to Juanxia, he found out that Qin Yongchang and Qin Feifei actually wanted them to get engaged to him, and they didn't reveal any news between them. At that time, it was impossible for Zhang Haoze to leave just like that, so when Qin Yongchang asked him to go on stage, he could only go up. After that, Qin Yongchang said a lot of good things to him in private. After explaining for a long time, he finally said that if he really didn't want to, he could wait until Qin Feifei's body got better and then break off the engagement with her. As for the current situation, it was better to let Qin Feifei rest well and recuperate. This way, even if Zhang Haoze didn't agree, it would still cause the fact that they were engaged. But in his heart he didn't agree. 1-1, it's not what you think between me and her. I understand it's not what I think. It's just that you want to repay her kindness. At this point, Shi Mingwan sneered. But Zhang Haoze, the Qin family is kind to you. Qin Feifei has heart disease. What does that have to do with me? Since you pity her so much and can't bear to part with her, then you can go to her side and take good care of her. Why are you looking for me? 1-1, do you know what your behavior is called? Shi Mingwan said bluntly. A scumbag. Shi Mingwan. Zhang Haoze looked at her, his face full of disapproval. Shi Mingwan smiled, but that smile didn't reach her eyes at all. Aren't you a scumbag? You're afraid of hurting Qin Feifei, but you're still hanging on to me? Do I owe you? Why should I swallow my anger like this? Or is it that in your heart I'm so easy to deceive? That I can let you do whatever you want? I didn't mean that. But you've already done it. Shi Mingwan's face was full of mockery and she didn't give in at all. Aren't you afraid of hurting Qin Feifei while hanging on to me? Zhang Haoze looked at Shi Mingwan and didn't explain. In fact, he couldn't explain. Because of the real reason he couldn't let her know at all. I'm not afraid of hurting Qin Feifei. I just don't want to be an ungrateful person. The Qin family is kind to me. Although I don't like Qin Feifei, I don't want anything to happen to her. Yes, you can't let anything happen to her, so you can let something happen to me. Shi Mingwan couldn't take it anymore. She turned around and was about to get off the bed when Zhang Haoze held her hand. Don't do this. Then what do you want me to do? Shi Mingwan shook his hand off. Accept the truth? Accept the fact that you have to take care of another woman's emotions when you're with me? I didn't. Don't say you didn't mean that. Just tell me directly, how long do you plan to take care of her? How long do you plan to hide our relationship? Zhang Haoze didn't avoid this question. Instead, he looked at Shi Mingwan very seriously. It won't be too long. Give me some time, I'll solve it. Unfortunately, I don't believe you. Zhang Haoze's face darkened because of her words. Shi Mingwan didn't want to continue. She left the bed and stood on the other side of the bed. Alright, that's it. Zhang Haoze, you go your own way and I'll go my own way. He liked to take care of Qin Feifei, so he would take care of her. She wasn't going to accompany him anymore. She still had to go to the organizing committee to see the results of the semifinals today, so she didn't have time to waste with Zhang Haoze here. After entering the bathroom, she washed up and changed her clothes. Shi Mingwan came out and prepared to leave. Zhang Haoze stood up at this moment. All right, Zhang Haoze. He had already said a lot today. Don't say any more. Either you break up with me and we won't have anything to do with each other, or you stay away from Qin Feifei. Go back to Lin City and announce that you're not engaged. Everything is a misunderstanding. How about that? Zhang Haoze's face darkened. At this time he couldn't do that. While he was silent and hesitant, Shi Mingwan had already picked up her bag and walked to the door. When she was about to leave, Zhang Haoze stood in front of her again. Zhang Haoze, I'll say it again. Either you do what you promised me or you leave this place. There is no third option. Her hand rose and she thought about pushing him away. The moment she raised her hand, she thought of the tattoo on his body. Gritting her teeth, she walked right past him and left. This time, Zhang Haoze didn't stop her. When she got out of the door, she was relieved, but at the same time she felt a sense of loss. She believed what Zhang Haoze said was true. He was such a proud person that he disdained to lie. But so what if what he said was true? What could it change? Qin Feifei had heart disease and needed him to take care of her. She was not in good health. Did he have to take care of her all the time? Take care of him 1 day at a time and 1 year at a time. He really valued relationships. Unfortunately, she didn't want to waste her time with him. Sister Shi, you're up so early? Just as she went out, Xiao Ji and Tong Yen had already woken up and were here. Sister Shi, are you very nervous? I'm not nervous. Shi Mingwan shook her head. Compared to what she was worried about, there was really nothing to be nervous about. If we can pass, then we'll pass. If we can't, then we'll just play for a few days as a vacation. Thinking about it this way, there's nothing bad about it. Sister Shi, your mentality is really good. Xiao Ji almost wanted to worship her. Shi Mingwan smiled, and her depressed mood was suppressed again. Let's go. What surprised Shi Mingwan was that she actually passed the semifinals. Among the 10 finalists, she was in the 9th place, as it was said that the rankings were not separated. This was really great news for her. Xiao Ji and Tong Yen were extremely happy. The two of them hugged her and congratulated her repeatedly. Shi Mingwan smiled. This was what they meant by frustrated in love, but successful in career, right? She passed the semifinals. Next, the 10 people who passed were ready to participate in the finals. We've already prepared the venue for the finals. For the next 7 days, you need to stay in the place we've prepared. You'll draw here, make the finished product, and walk until you've finished your work. Because the venue is a little far, you can go back and pack your things now. Gather here in the afternoon. We'll have a car to send you to the venue. The people from the organizing committee explained the rules again. Shi Mingwan, Xiao Ji, and the others all memorized it very seriously. After memorizing it, they decided to go back to the hotel to pack their luggage first and then come over to gather in the afternoon. Shi Mingwan, Xiao Ji, and the others returned to the hotel. Xiao Ji stood at the door of the room and looked at Shi Mingwan. Sister Shi, do you want us to help you pack? No need. Shi Mingwan shook her head. You guys go pack your things. We'll go out for a meal later. Okay, Sister Shi. It's still early anyway. We can come back after dinner and rest for a while. Shi Mingwan nodded. Now, she just didn't know where the organizing committee would arrange for them. After entering the door, Shi Mingwan thought that Zhang Haoze had already left. She didn't expect him to still be in the room. Seeing that he hadn't left yet, Shi Mingwan's expression didn't look too good. Why haven't you left yet? Zhang Haoze stood up. Don't call me. Shi Mingwan took a step back. Just as she was about to open the door and let him leave, someone knocked on the door first. Shi Mingwan was shocked. She stood at the door and wasn't in a hurry to open it. Instead, she looked out through the peephole. Chapter 678. Shi Mingwan's body was pressed against the door. Wang Xianying was outside and Zhang Haoze was inside. She was a little confused. Her only thought was that she couldn't let the two of them meet. Turning around, she suddenly faced John House's approaching body. It was rare for her to feel a little nervous. What do you want? After asking this question, Shi Mingwan realized how stupid her question was. She almost bit her tongue off. John House, go to the bathroom and hide for a while. John House narrowed his eyes and looked at her without moving at all. John House. There was another knock on the door. Shi Mingwan's eyes were a little anxious. She started to reach out to push him. However, considering that he was injured, she didn't use too much strength. John House suddenly grabbed her hand and pulled her into his arms. He lowered his head and kissed her heavily on the lips. Shi Mingwan sucked in a breath of cold air, but he took advantage of this moment to barge in. He forcefully plundered her. It seemed like it had been a long time since he kissed her like this. John House's heart was moved and he couldn't control himself. His kiss had always been irresistible to her. Before long she was completely immersed in his kiss. She wrapped her hands around the back of his waist and slowly moved up. There were a few more knocks on the door, and Shi Mingwan came back to her senses from John House's kiss. She pushed hard and John House took 2 steps back. Shi Mingwan stood there and kept adjusting her breathing. John House, if you plan to let others know that you're with me now, you can continue. John House didn't continue. He looked deeply at Shi Mingwan, then nodded and turned to enter the bathroom. Shi Mingwan heaved a sigh of relief. She was really afraid that John House would continue regardless. After all, not many people knew them in this foreign country. Taking a deep breath, she turned to open the door. Wan Xianying, who was outside the door, smiled when he saw her. He handed a bouquet of flowers to her with a faint smile on his face. Congratulations. You? Shi Mingwan looked at the bouquet of flowers and wasn't in a hurry to take it. Wan Xianying took a step forward and gestured for her to accept the flowers. What? You passed the semi-finals and entered the finals. Isn't it worth being happy about? Thank you. Shi Mingwan took the flowers. Wan Xianying looked at her face and his gaze fell on her body. Her clothes were a little messy, but he couldn't tell if he didn't look closely. His gaze shifted upwards and landed on the other party's lips. Wan Xianying narrowed his eyes slightly. It was only for a moment before he quickly put on a smile. What? Aren't you going to invite me in? This was not convenient at all. Shi Mingwan looked at the bouquet of flowers in her hand, but she couldn't refuse. Please come in. You don't have to be so polite. Wan Xianying entered the door and quickly scanned the room. He didn't see anyone. Finally, he glanced in the direction of the bathroom and sat down on the sofa in the room. That's right, you've passed the semi-finals. Next should be the finals, right? I heard that you guys are going to complete your work in isolation? You even know this? Shi Mingwan was indeed a little surprised. I have a friend in the committee. So one more question. Wan Xianying looked at her with a cautious expression. You won't be angry, right? I won't. This competition was no secret. In order to ensure fairness, the officials had already announced the process. Are you guys going in the afternoon? Why don't I send you there? There's no need. Shi Mingwan refused without thinking. I brought my assistant over. She has arranged a car. We'll go together when the time comes. All right then. Wan Xianying looked at her. How many days are you going? I'll pick you guys up and celebrate for you. Is that okay? We still don't know how the results are. It's too early to celebrate. In such a competition with so many experts, Shi Mingwan didn't dare to think that she could get into the top 3. She was already very happy to be able to enter the semi-finals. I have confidence in you. You'll definitely get a very good ranking. Wan Xianying was much more confident in her. Maybe you can even get first place. Don't joke around. Shi Mingwan looked at the list of people who came to participate this time, especially those who made it into the top 10. She even paid attention today. Masters wouldn't come to such a competition, but there were many newcomers with good results. She was just a small studio. It was already her luck to be able to make it into the top 10. Don't think that way. In my heart, you're number 1. Wan Xianying's words were equivalent to saying sweet nothings. Shi Mingwan didn't reply. Do you have anything else? Are you asking me to leave? No, I still have to pack my things. Xiao Ji and the others will come to find me later. Then you're still chasing me away. Wan Xianying, all right, I'll leave, okay? Wan Xianying stood up as he spoke. When he passed by Shi Mingwan, he stopped. If you need to pack your things, I won't disturb you anymore. However, I still hope that I can celebrate with you if I have the chance. Thank you. Wan Xianying continued to walk out. When he passed by the bathroom door, he glanced there seemingly unintentionally. Shi Mingwan's heart instantly skipped a beat. She took a few steps and opened the door first. Wan Xianying had already walked to the door. When he saw her actions, he smiled helplessly. "You really can't wait to chase me away. I'm really hurt when you're like this." Shi Mingwan was stunned for a moment, but Wan Xianying moved his body forward a little. "In order to calm my hurt heart, why don't you give me a comforting kiss?" Shi Mingwan was shocked by his actions, but Wan Xianying suddenly smiled. "All right, I won't tease you anymore. Come on. Compete well. I wish you a good ranking." "Okay. Thank you." Shi Mingwan's expression wasn't as casual as before. Even though Wan Xianying had expressed his intention to leave, her eyes were still a little guarded. That look made Wan Xianying sigh in his heart. Sister-in-law's best friend was really not easy to get close to. However, when he stepped out of the room, he unintentionally glanced in the direction of the bathroom again. Why did he feel that the door seemed to have moved just now? However, before he could see clearly, Shi Mingwan had already quickly closed the door. After Wan Xianying left, Shi Mingwan heaved a sigh of relief. However, just as she turned around, she saw Zhang Haoze coming out of the bathroom. With a cold face, he stood there expressionlessly and looked at her. Under his gaze, Shi Mingwan actually felt a sense of guilt. But it was only for a moment and she quickly ignored it. Based on what? He could be engaged to another woman and be affectionate with her. She only had a suitor and yet she felt guilty? She walked past Zhang Haoze and planned to continue packing her luggage, but her arm was grabbed by Zhang Haoze. Her body was turned around by him, and then she was pressed against the wall behind her. "Zhang Haoze," she cried out. Zhang Haoze didn't give her a chance to speak again. He lowered his head to kiss her. It was a fierce and rough kiss. Shi Mingwan's lips were in pain from being crushed by him. She pushed him, but he didn't move at all. In a hurry, she placed her hand on his abdomen and wanted to attack his wound. But when she really touched that area, she put her hand down again. This pause undoubtedly gave Zhang Haoze another chance. He easily lifted her body and put her in a position where he was. Once again, he sealed her lips and nibbled on those two soft lips. Shi Mingwan was in pain and bit him instead. She used even more strength than Zhang Haoze. She bit down just like that, and she bit him so hard that his lips were bitten open just like that. The two of them tasted blood at the same time. The scene in front of them was so similar. Shi Mingwan thought of the last time she went on a blind date with Xiaoqi, and Zhang Haoze was also like this. She felt hatred in her heart and pushed him hard without caring about anything else. Zhang Haoze's abdomen was pushed by her. He snorted in pain and took a step back. Shi Mingwan used this opportunity to retreat from his arms and stand on the other side. Her chest was heaving violently, and her lips were still stained with blood. Her hair was a little messy, and the front of her clothes was mostly crooked. She looked like she was in a sorry state, but there was also a kind of beauty in her. Zhang Haoze narrowed his eyes and subconsciously took a step forward. Shi Mingwan took a step back. She looked at the person in front of her with a burning gaze. "Zhang Haoze, you can't be like this every time." Her heart was beating a little fast. She bit her lip, and the expression on her face was a little reproachful and bitter at the same time. "I'm your girlfriend, right? If not, what right do you have to treat me like this? If you're your girlfriend, what right do you have to treat me like this?" She closed her eyes and forced herself not to admit defeat in front of Zhang Haoze. "Zhang Haoze, can you respect me? Or is it that in your heart, I'm just that kind of casual woman that you can do whatever you want?" Zhang Haoze was a little stunned by her righteous words, but Shi Mingwan didn't want to care about him anymore. "Zhang Haoze, I'm going to the venue prepared by the organizing committee this afternoon for the competition. I won't be here for the next few days. Help yourself." She turned around to pack her luggage and stopped after taking 2 steps. "Zhang Haoze, I don't think you like me that much, right? It's just a possessive desire. If it's not me, it can be other women. To you there's no difference." To him, she was just an embellishment in his life. But to her, he was everything. Not treating her feelings seriously meant that she was at a disadvantage in this relationship. Her silhouette looked lonely from behind, which was rare for her to be like that. No matter when, she always gave people the feeling that she was optimistic and cheerful. Zhang Haoze stared at her back. Finally, when her hand touched the suitcase, he went forward and pulled her back into his arms. "I didn't." Zhang Haoze looked at her and instinctively wanted to explain. In his heart, he had never seen her as a casual woman. "Nothing? I'm not," Zhang Haoze said again. This time he sounded even more serious than before. Shi Mingwan looked at him and inexplicably understood what he meant. He said that he wasn't being possessive. Are you trying to say that you like me? Shi Mingwan looked at him and returned to yesterday's question. Then do you think of me as your girlfriend? Zhang Haoze looked at her face and nodded gently. His expression was extremely serious. Shi Mingwan looked at him. Then after we go back, can you make our relationship public? The problem was back to square one, but Shi Mingwan was especially concerned about this problem. If a man couldn't even let a woman stand by his side publicly and let everyone know that she was his girlfriend, what was the use of such a man? No. Zhang Haoze refused without thinking. There were still many dangers around him. This injury was just a warning. Shi Mingwan suddenly smiled as if she wasn't surprised by this answer at all. She pulled her hand out of Zhang Haoze's hand bit by bit. Zhang Haoze, you're really a bastard. Without looking at him, Shi Mingwan turned around and went to pack her luggage. There wasn't much to pack. They were outside anyway. In less than 20 minutes she had packed everything. She pulled her suitcase and walked past Zhang Haoze to look for Xiao Ji and the others next door. Zhang Haoze took a step to the side, wanting to block Shi Mingwan's path. Shi Mingwan looked at him coldly. Zhang Haoze, this competition is very important. Please move aside. 1-1. Zhang Haoze didn't know what to say, but he couldn't let her know what had happened. Just now, you don't have to explain. She looked at his conflicted expression and could roughly tell what he wanted to say. Unfortunately, she didn't want to hear it. The problem between us isn't about your actions just now. It's about your actions, your attitude towards me. I don't mean to look down on you, but now is really not the right time to make it public. Yes, it wasn't suitable, it just couldn't be. Then when was the right time? When could it be? Did he have an answer? I'm afraid not. She felt tired and didn't want to continue. Forget it. You'll never understand. She glanced at him. I'm going to the competition. Make yourself at home. Pulling her suitcase, Shi Mingwan left the room without looking back. This time the organizing committee had really put in a lot of money. The venue for the finals was actually an ancient castle. The ancient castle was provided by the president of one of the sponsors this time. The first, second, and third designers also had the chance to work for this company. It had always been a world-class clothing brand. Such an opportunity was an excellent opportunity for all the participants. However, Shi Mingwan didn't have such plans. Her goal wasn't even to promote her studio. After all, if she wanted to talk about fame, she already had her own regular clients in Lin City. She came just to prove her ability. To prove that she could do it. The 10 points for the competition were arranged in the rooms on the first and second floors of the villa. For the next few days, except for special circumstances, all the participants were not allowed to leave. However, all the electronic equipment in the room was available. When Shi Mingwan entered the castle, she also received the theme of the finals, First Love. When she received this theme, Shi Mingwan felt Xiao Ji and Tong Yan looking at her worriedly. Sister Shi. Xiao Ji looked as if the sky had collapsed. You've never been in love before. Why did you choose such a theme? The sweet one from before was still a little better. Sweetness didn't just refer to love. Family, friendship, the little warmth of society. In this life there would always be times when one would feel sweet, right? But this first love? Xiao Ji's face was inexplicably full of worry. Shi Mingwan glanced at Xiao Ji and gently knocked her on the head. Alright, think about how you can help me. Let's go. The room Shi Mingwan was assigned was on the second floor. There was a large balcony here. There was a sofa and a coffee table on the balcony. From the balcony, one could see the beautiful scenery in the distance, as well as the well-tended garden downstairs. Shi Mingwan couldn't help but sigh. This sponsor had really put in a lot of money. She sat on the sofa and looked at the beautiful scenery outside. She wasn't in a hurry to draw. First love. Her first love was Zhang Haoze. But this first love, where did it begin? Now, or more than 10 years ago. She picked up the black tea prepared by the organizing committee on the table. Shi Mingwan's heart flew back to the year when she was 12 years old. She and Zhang Haoze depended on each other. When they met, it was when they were at their most miserable. She was actually a good girl. In the past, she, who had been strictly educated by Mother Shi, almost didn't dare to think that one day, she would have a relationship with a boy who was like a hooligan. But now, not only did it happen, but it also happened so unexpectedly. They were each other's comfort and support. She believed that if it weren't for Zhang Haoze, she might have admitted defeat long ago and gone home. She also knew that if it weren't for her, her dear brother at that time definitely wouldn't have taken good care of himself. He would have fought everywhere, and then when he was injured, he would only casually treat his wounds. She once thought that if her dear brother was willing, she could stay with him like that for the rest of her life. But her dear brother didn't give her that chance. The heavens didn't give her that chance. After going around in circles, they could be considered to have met now. But some things were already the same, but the people had changed. Shi Mingwan thought of a certain scene and suddenly stood up. She walked to the table and took out a pen and paper. When Xiao Ji and Tong Yen settled down and came in, they saw Shi Mingwan, who had already devoted herself to her work. She lowered her head and drew very seriously. This room happened to face the west. The sunlight shone in from the huge balcony, dyeing Shi Mingwan's body with a layer of gold. Xiao Ji was shocked by such a scene. She couldn't help but take out her phone and quietly take a few photos of Shi Mingwan. After taking the photos, she logged into Shi Mingwan's Weibo. Song Seeking Studio didn't set up a Weibo. However, Shi Mingwan had one. Most of the time, she managed her Weibo by herself. Occasionally, when the company had activities, she would ask Xiao Ji to post some activities. The picture attached to, during the finals, was the photo that Xiao Ji had just posted. She even made a 9-grid grid. After posting the photo, she glanced at Tong Yen. Tong Yen also had some ideas at this moment. He went into the room and found a place to sit down. Then he took out his tools. Xiao Ji looked at the two of them and turned around to be in charge of logistics. Time passed very quickly. In the blink of an eye, 7 days had passed. The main color Shi Mingwan used this time was green, a faint green. What was first love? It was youth, it was budding, that moment of heartbeat. It was like a tender bud that had just grown in spring, just emerging. She still remembered how she felt back then. When she left her dear brother, she felt uncomfortable, conflicted, and painful. However, there was more joy, beauty, and a smile on her face when she recalled the past. This was what Shi Mingwan thought. She designed a total of 3 pieces of clothing. This was also the requirement of the competition. Every designer decided to submit at least 2 pieces of work. Shi Mingwan, on the other hand, drew 3 pieces in one go. The main piece was a dress. She used Ogan yarn as the main fabric. It was a little hard. Because they didn't understand love, the feelings of young men and women were a little stiff. However, there were also some lighter green leaves dotted among them. First love was beautiful, but there were too many things that could distract a person. First love couldn't be the only one. If the two of them wanted to be together, there were too many misgivings. If they broke up, there would be too many external reasons. Shi Mingwan was very satisfied with this set of works. She poured all of her feelings into it. After the finished product was made, Shi Mingwan submitted the work and the design drawings together. The rest was out of her control. All those who had submitted their works could play around the castle for the rest of the time. She told herself to relax and played seriously with Tong Yen and Xiao Ji in the castle for a day. Finally, it was time to announce the results. The 10 people who participated in the finals were all experts. Shi Mingwan saw the other 9 works on the day of the announcement. She had to admit that the standards of the competition were indeed amazing. When the final rankings were announced, a pink dress designed by a local French designer won first place. The second place was an Italian designer, and the third place was a designer from Hong Kong. The colors used by the other party were quite bold. The design theme was like first love, brave and fearless. When Shi Mingwan saw those works, she knew that she probably wouldn't be in the top 3. After all, she had something on her mind and had too many worries. But to her surprise, she actually won the most special design award. She was 4th place. Shi Mingwan was satisfied. After the award ceremony, the other designers came to congratulate her. That night, the organizers and the organizing committee held a celebration dinner in the castle. All the designers who came to participate had to wear the themed clothes they had designed. Shi Mingwan put on the green dress. She looked like an elf in the forest. When she entered the banquet hall, she attracted a lot of attention. At this banquet, there were many local fashion brands from Paris. There were clothes, bags, jewelry and perfume. It was Shi Mingwan's first time seeing so many legendary figures. She was fine. No matter what, she had been to the Su family and Hua Jinyao's company a few times. It was the first time Xiao Ji and Tong Yen had been to such a place. The 2 girls didn't know where to put their hands and feet. Shi Mingwan couldn't help but laugh. Just as she was about to comfort them, the person in charge of the sponsor, Dixon, waved at her from the other side and asked her to go over. Shi Mingwan had no choice but to ask Xiao Ji and Tong Yen to find a place to stay and not run around. She went in Dixon's direction. Sure. Shi Mingwan didn't come over with an English name. They all called her by her surname. Dixon looked at Shi Mingwan with a faint smile on his face. Chapter 679. Was he also from China? Sure, Mingwan was a little interested. Up until now, she was the only one from the mainland who had participated in the competition. She had chatted with the third-place Hong Kong beauty for a long time, and the other party kept asking her to go to Hong Kong to play. She was already very happy to be able to meet a Chinese person, but there was actually a Chinese person now? Was it also a manufacturer from China? Or, as he spoke, Dixon took half a step to the side and looked behind him. Jean, let me introduce you. This is Miss Sher, also from Lin City. Her work this time is very good. It's very spiritual. Sure, this is Jean. He's also from Lin City, China. In your words, he's a fellow villager. Dixon smiled brightly, but Sher Mingwan's expression instantly stiffened. Sher Mingwan looked at Jean Hausa, who suddenly appeared in front of her. For a moment she thought there was something wrong with her eyes. Why was he here? Seeing that she didn't say anything, Dixon thought that she didn't know Jean Hausa's identity, so he explained further. Sure, although Jean is from China, he also has his own business in France, including some fashion brands. Dixon said two names, and Sher Mingwan looked at Jean Hausa in surprise. He was wearing a white suit with a dark red pattern stitched from the collar to the shoulders. The close-fitting tailoring in such a design made him look a little more noble. She could even feel Jean Hausa's gaze landing on him when he stood up. However, she wasn't just paying attention to Jean Hausa's current appearance. Her mind was filled with the two names that Dixon had mentioned. They were two new fashion brands. Although the design was considered niche, it was already quite well known in the country and in Europe and the United States. Were these two clothing brands Jean Hausa's business? She lowered her eyes and thought of something from a long time ago. It was not long after she went to school. It was the day after she found out that her dear brother would still fight with others outside and get injured. She suddenly had an inspiration and drew a design that was still considered immature at that time. At that time she took the design and ran to show it to Xiaozhe. The young man looked at her with gentleness in his eyes. Dear brother, what do you think of this dress? Not bad. It's very beautiful. The youth wasn't stingy with his compliments. If Wanwan wore it, it would be even more beautiful. Really? Big brother, you're not lying to me, right? No. I'm serious. As the young man spoke, he pulled her to his side and sat her down. His gaze fell on the painting in the young lady's hand, but he put his arm around her shoulder and pulled her closer to him. He liked her being close to him and he liked being close to her. Sher Mingwan took the opportunity to lean on his shoulder and also look at the design drawing. Finally, she turned to look at the young man. Big brother. Can you help me in the future? Help you? Yeah, I'll draw and design clothes and you'll make clothes. You'll open a big factory and sell the clothes I designed to more people. The young man looked into her eyes. He didn't think that it would be a difficult goal for them to achieve now. Instead, he nodded lightly and said, all right. What Sher Mingwan didn't say was that at that time, dear brother would have something to do and wouldn't fight outside anymore. She knew that even though he was very good at fighting and rarely got hurt, he was still very good at fighting. However, she was still very worried about him and didn't want him to be like that in the future. Big brother. In the future, I will definitely draw a lot of beautiful pictures. At that time, there will definitely be a lot of people who will buy the clothes I design. At that time you must help me, okay? Okay. Dear brother. Yes. In the future, when we earn money, we can move to a big house and we can travel around the world. We don't have to stay here anymore. At that time, can you stop fighting with others? Okay. The young man pressed her body into his arms. He used a little too much strength. He smelled the young lady's scent on her body, and his eyes were firm. Dear brother. Every time you go out, I'm very worried about you. I don't like you fighting with others. Next time you really don't fight with others, okay? Okay. Dear brother. You're so nice. The young lady smiled happily. The young man looked at the self-destruction on her face and forced himself to calm down. Then he looked at her and said very firmly, I don't fight with others. When you grow up and become a fashion designer, I'll open a clothing company. I'll specialize in selling clothes designed by you. Okay. Then I'll wait for you. The young lady smiled brightly. At that moment, the dilapidated bungalow seemed to have welcomed a sky full of stars. Dixon's voice brought her back to her senses. Sorry, I was a little distracted. Sher Mingwan looked at that handsome face and forced herself to look away. Did Jean Hausa create those two clothing brands for her? Could she think like that? But looking at him, she couldn't link these two things together at all. Dixon acted as if he didn't notice the loss of composure on her face and continued to talk about Jean Hausa's identity in high spirits. These are all brands under Jean's banner. You're all from China. I think you two should have something to talk about. After Dixon finished speaking, someone happened to be looking for her. She excused herself to the two of them and left first. Only Zhang Haoze and Shi Mengwan were left standing there. Shi Mengwan stood still. She thought about what Dixon said just now. Zhang Haoze actually had a business in France? Didn't he run a technology company? What had he been doing outside all these years? What had he experienced? She couldn't help but feel a trace of curiosity. However, she forced herself to look away and nod at Zhang Haoze. Congratulations. Zhang Haoze stood beside her. A waiter happened to pass by. He picked up 2 glasses of champagne from the tray and placed one of them in Shi Mengwan's hand. Shi Mengwan looked at him for a while and finally reached out to take it. There's nothing to congratulate. She didn't enter the top 3 again. Zhang Haoze's gaze fell on her. The extremely fresh green color contrasted with her snow-white skin. The top was a one-shoulder design that was tailored to fit her body. A leaf just extended to her shoulder, and the bottom was layered with light muslin. Zhang Haoze gently clinked his glass with hers. In my heart, you're number 1. Shi Mengwan was stunned by his words. Her hand that was holding the glass stopped there and she just looked at him. Realizing that she was affected by him again, Shi Mengwan turned her face away. She didn't let herself sink any further. She casually took a sip of champagne. Standing next to Zhang Haoze made her feel uncomfortable. She put the glass aside and turned around to leave. However, Zhang Haoze put down the glass and held her hand. Shi Mengwan looked at that hand and then at the other people in the banquet hall. She lowered her voice and was a little anxious. Let go. The music in the hall changed at this moment. Zhang Haoze looked at Shi Mengwan and reached out his hand to her. Shi Mengwan understood what he meant and took a step back. Let's go. Dance with me. As Zhang Haoze spoke, he held her hand and led her to the dance floor in the middle of the hall. Shi Mengwan wanted to retreat, but his hand had already wrapped around her waist. He led her around the edge of the dance floor. Bit by bit they slid into the middle of the dance floor. Being led by him like this, even if Shi Mengwan didn't want to, she could only dance and spin with his steps. After dancing a few steps, she realized that Zhang Haoze's dancing skills were pretty good. She was a little surprised. Her dancing skills weren't considered good. After all, she wasn't a rich young lady. There weren't many opportunities for her to attend banquets. Now that Zhang Haoze was leading her, she looked at Zhang Haoze in front of her. There were more and more secrets about him that she couldn't figure out and couldn't see through. However, not only could she not let go of these secrets, but she also wanted to get closer and know more. Shi Mengwan's footsteps turned in a circle. This kind of thinking was very dangerous. She had to suppress it. Zhang Haoze was very dangerous. She had to stay away. Her rationality kept reminding her, but when she looked at Zhang Haoze's deep eyes, she could only dance with his footsteps. You're very beautiful today. Zhang Haoze moved his face closer to Shi Mengwan's ear. He spoke in a soft voice and the hot air he blew out was right next to her ear. Her ears turned red and she subconsciously shrank her neck. She wanted to avoid him, but she and Zhang Haoze were already dancing. Where could she hide? Zhang Haoze's hand around her waist slightly tightened, and she moved closer to him instead. Shi Mengwan had already made up her mind to stay away from him. His actions made her want to escape from his arms. Have you ever thought about cooperating with these big European and American brands? Promote your designs all over the world. The sudden voice above her head stunned Shi Mengwan. She looked up at him with a hint of shock in her eyes. Zhang Haoze, have you never thought about it? Zhang Haoze looked at her and said indifferently, if you want, whether it's Dixon or any other company, you can think about it. The information revealed by these words was too much. Shi Mengwan furrowed her brows. She looked up at Zhang Haoze's face as if it was the first time she had met him. Zhang Haoze, who exactly are you? Dear brother was 15 when he met her and he was 16 when they separated. The two of them had been separated for 12 years. What exactly had Zhang Haoze done in the past 12 years? What had he experienced? Was he really her dear brother? With his situation back then, it was really a little scary for him to have achieved what he had today in 12 years. Putting aside the 2 clothing brands that Dixon had mentioned just now, it was definitely not easy to be able to reach such a level abroad. After she met Xiaoqi, she specially went to investigate the technology company that she had mentioned. She also investigated Zhang Haoze. Although their company's website didn't have a photo of Zhang Haoze, the introduction on it was very clear. The technology company that Xiaoqi was talking about was founded by Zhang Haoze. Now its market value was countless times higher than when it was founded. With such ability and such methods, she thought of the young man who only knew how to fight back then. She really couldn't connect the person in front of her with that young man. Jean Hauser looked into her eyes and tilted his head slightly. A kiss fell on her lips just like that. His voice was very soft. "I'm your man." Shi Mingwan's face suddenly turned red. She wanted to push Jean Hauser away, but she realized that he had brought her to the edge of the dance floor. The music changed at this moment. Jean Hauser took the opportunity to let go of her hand and brought her to the corner of the hall. As one of the invited guests, Jean Hauser also had a room in the castle. He brought Shi Mingwan upstairs. Shi Mingwan tried to break free from his hand a few times, but she didn't get what she wanted. When she went up to the second floor, she was surprised to find that Jean Hauser's room was actually arranged next to hers. Her body was brought in by him and her hand grabbed the door handle. "Jean Hauser, don't do anything rash." There were still so many guests downstairs and Dixon was also there. Could it be that he was thinking? Jean Hauser looked at the resistance on her face and easily carried her body. With a tap of his toes, the door was closed. He pushed her against the door and gently caressed her collarbone with his big hand. "I wanted to do that just now." As he spoke, he lowered his head and planted a kiss on the spot where his fingertips touched. Jean Hauser barely managed to retain some rationality. He didn't tear her dress apart, but the slow process of taking it off made Shi Mingwan's face turn red. Her body had already become unlike her own. She could only follow his movements to climb up or down. He was like a sharp sword, avoiding her, and she was the sea, containing his every attack. The moment he got off her, he didn't let go of her. Instead, he pulled her into his arms. Shi Mingwan couldn't move. She looked at the ceiling above her head, not quite understanding how things had turned out like this. She turned to look at him and he was also looking at her. Shi Mingwan felt a little uncomfortable under his overly passionate gaze. When she shifted her gaze away, she saw his bare upper body. There was a scar on his abdomen and it could be seen very clearly. This was the wound from a few days ago. The stitches had been removed but the scar was still there. Previously, because of his engagement with Chen Feifei, Shi Mingwan had always forced herself not to care about him and not to care about him. Now that she saw this wound, she couldn't help but reach out and caress it. "How did you get it?" It was so long and she didn't know if it was deep. It must have been very painful at that time, right? "Are you concerned about me?" Jean Hauser's voice sounded like there was a hint of a smile in it. "No." Shi Mingwan wanted to retract her hand, but Jean Hauser grabbed her hand and pressed it against the wound. She couldn't pull her hand back, so he grabbed it and caressed it bit by bit along the lines of the wound. The feeling there wasn't smooth. After Shi Mingwan felt it from beginning to end, she suddenly retracted her hand. She flipped over and turned around. There was no way she wouldn't look at him. Jean Hauser didn't understand what was wrong with her. He wanted to turn her body right, but she stubbornly refused. He was very strong, but in the end she was turned around by him. Only then did he realize that her eyes were red and there was a faint mist in them. "Wan?" Shi Mingwan lowered her head and didn't look at him. She remembered that the young man had promised her that he wouldn't fight with anyone again. But whether it was when she met him in the alley of the bungalow district or this time. In short, he went back on his word. He forgot his promise, just like how he forgot that he had promised himself that he would take care of her and protect her for the rest of her life. "Wan?" Jean Hauser called her again. Compared to the rudeness and fierceness he had when he was entangled with her on the bed just now, the way he called her name was extremely gentle. Shi Mingwan had the urge to cry, but she didn't want him to see her like this. She pushed him and got up to leave. However, she forgot that her body was still weak from the strenuous exercise. Just as she wanted to sit up, she fell back again. This time she happened to fall into his arms. He just wanted to stop her, so her chin hit the top of his head. Shi Mingwan was in pain. The tears that she had been holding back just now fell uncontrollably. Her tears stimulated Jean Hauser. He got up and wrapped her in his arms. "Wan?" Shi Mingwan rarely felt so vulnerable. Now she suddenly wanted to cry and felt uncomfortable. The emotions that she had been suppressing since her reunion with Jean Hauser seemed to finally be able to be vented. She raised her hand and suddenly punched Jean Hauser's chest. "Bastard, you bastard." As she spoke, she punched him a few more times. Her strength was nothing more than scratching an itch to him. Jean Hauser didn't stop her and let her punch him. Shi Mingwan punched him many times until her hands were out of strength. She finally stopped and leaned her face against Jean Hauser. Her voice was very soft. "Jean Hauser, you're a bastard." He only knew how to bully her. He had always been like this. "Jean Hauser, you're a liar." He had clearly promised her something, but he couldn't do anything. If he wasn't a liar, then what was he? Jean Hausa, you're still a thief. He stole her heart, but he didn't want to take responsibility. He was really a thief. You bastard, you liar, you thief. Shi Mingwan wouldn't scold him anymore. She only said these 3 words back and forth. In the end, she was tired of fighting and scolding. In addition, she had been mentally and physically exhausted for the finals these few days. By the time Jean Hausa realized it, she had already closed her eyes and fell asleep on his chest. Even though she was asleep, her lips still seemed to be moving. He got closer and listened carefully. He heard the word bastard. Jean Hausa gently picked her up and laid her flat on the bed. He looked at her and gently caressed her cheek. There were still traces of tears there. He wiped away those tears one by one. Finally, he planted a kiss on her forehead. He wanted to lie down with her. Ever since Shi Mingwan left that day, he hadn't been idle for the past few days. He had a lot of things to do, but now he just wanted to hug this woman and sleep for a while. However, as soon as he lay down, his phone rang. Before waking Shi Mingwan up, Jean Hausa quickly turned off the sound of his phone. Then he got up and went to the bathroom to answer the phone. The news from the other side made his expression solemn. He seemed to have thought of something and spoke extremely calmly. I'll be right back. Prepare the plane. Walking out of the bathroom, Shi Mingwan was sleeping soundly. Jean Hausa put on his clothes and stared at her sleeping face by the bed for a long time. Finally, he turned around and left resolutely. After Shi Mingwan returned from France, the workload of the studio increased a lot. Although she didn't get the top 3, the most special design award and the 4th place in the competition were still very good. Especially the Weibo post that Xiaoji posted on her phone that day. She was called the most beautiful female designer. Now, in addition to the high order, many clothing companies came to ask her if she was interested in mass production. Shi Mingwan was too busy, so she rejected them for the time being. Most importantly, she remembered what Jean Hausa said that day. Speaking of Jean Hausa, it wasn't strange that she didn't see Jean Hausa when she woke up the next day. He seemed to have always been like this. He came and went as he pleased. What was she to him? Did they break up like this? She didn't go back to her room for the whole night, and her phone was left with Xiaoji. The next day, Xiaoji and Tong Yen were looking for her like crazy. Shi Mingwan could only say that she was drunk yesterday and found a room to sleep. If it weren't for the fact that this was Dixon's castle, Xiaoji and Tong Yen wouldn't have believed her so easily. After returning to Lin City, Shi Mingwan had been paying attention to the news of the Chen family in Lin City. She found that other than the news of the engagement last time, there was no other news. Shi Mingwan couldn't tell what she felt. She really wanted to look for Jean Hausa, but she also wanted to use this opportunity to break it off. Soon, she wasn't in the mood to worry about Jean Hausa. When Su Qingsang went to be an exchange doctor, there was an earthquake. Then Su Qingsang lost contact. Shi Mingwan couldn't sit still anymore. She went to the Su family to look for Li Qianxue. It was only after she went to Rong City that she found out that Su Qingsang wasn't Xiang Caiping's daughter, but Li Qianxue's daughter. She really couldn't have imagined such a thing. Now that Su Qingsang was in trouble, she definitely couldn't go to the disaster area, but the Su family would have a way, right? Li Qianxue was also worried, but she received a call from Hua Jinyao. Hua Jinyao comforted her and said that he had already brought supplies to the disaster area and told her not to worry. No matter how anxious she was now, she knew that with her physical and mental state, going to the disaster area would only cause more trouble. No matter how worried she was, she could only trust Hua Jinyao now. Shi Mingwan couldn't be as calm as Li Qianxue. She and Su Qingsang had known each other for so many years. To her, Su Qingsang was like a sister. She also wanted to go to the disaster area to look for Su Qingsang. However, not everyone could go to the disaster area now. If Hua Jinyao hadn't donated a large amount of supplies and followed them to the disaster area, it wouldn't have been so easy for him. She thought about it, but she didn't know how to go to the disaster area and participate in the search for Su Qingsang. Finally, she thought of Jean Hausa. She took out her phone and called Jean Hausa, but no one answered. After staring at the phone for a long time, she decided to make a trip herself. The car stopped downstairs of the technology company where Jean Hausa was. Shi Mingwan wasn't sure if she could find him if she went upstairs. Maybe he wasn't in the company? She wanted to leave, but her worry for Su Qingsang overwhelmed everything else. After entering the building, she was in no mood to appreciate the ultra-modern decoration and some equipment that could only be seen in movies. She walked directly to the front desk and told the front desk that she was looking for Jean Hausa. "You're looking for President Jean? I'm sorry. If you don't have an appointment, we can't let you go up." Can you ask? I'm sorry, ma'am. I really can't see President Zhang without an appointment. Shi Mingwan gritted her teeth and was still thinking about how to go up and see Zhang Haoze. She heard someone calling her. Chapter 680. Mingwan. Xiao Qi's voice made her turn around. She was relieved to see an acquaintance, but at the same time she felt a little uncomfortable. Why are you here? Are you here for me? Xiao Qi had been sent to the branch office by Zhang Haoze. Today he happened to be here to report, but he didn't expect to see Shi Mingwan. No. Shi Mingwan stood there a little hesitant. She didn't know if she should tell Xiao Qi. Then what are you doing? I'm looking for Zhang Haoze. Shi Mingwan looked at him. Her voice was a little obscure and a little shy. But they said that I can't go up without an appointment. You're looking for President Zhang? Xiao Qi was stunned. He didn't seem to understand what kind of relationship Shi Mingwan had with Zhang Haoze. Yes. I have something to talk to him about. Shi Mingwan looked at Xiao Qi. She knew that she shouldn't, but she still said, Do you have a way for me to see him? Come with me. He was doing well in the new company, so he still had some face in front of Zhang Haoze. Thank you. Shi Mingwan nodded. Xiao Qi didn't ask further and led her to the elevator. With Shorky leading the way, this one went very smoothly. When she went upstairs, Tang Hua happened to be there too. He was stunned when he saw Shi Mingwan. He glanced at Xiao Qi with obvious disapproval in his eyes. Xiao Qi was a little embarrassed. In fact, he didn't know what the relationship between Shi Mingwan and Zhang Haoze was. She has something to talk to President Zhang about. Assistant Tang, can you help inform him? He knew that Zhang Haoze had just finished a meeting and should be in his office. Tang Hua looked at him and turned to Shi Mingwan. He naturally knew Shi Mingwan. Wait a moment. Tang Hua entered the door. Xiao Qi looked at Shi Mingwan and wanted to ask several times. Sean, thank you. Shi Mingwan looked at him and remembered that she still owed him an explanation. If there's a chance next time I'll tell you. It doesn't matter. Xiao Qi waved his hand. It doesn't matter if you don't want to tell me. I believe in you. Shi Mingwan didn't say anything, but there was a rare hint of emotion in her eyes. Her relationship with Zhang Haoze had almost become her own bitter journey. She couldn't tell her family, she couldn't tell her friends, and she couldn't even let others know. Although she was separated from Zhang Haoze, not only did she not get any relief, but she also felt more and more uncomfortable. Zhang Haoze was like a poison to her. She couldn't get rid of it. If he wanted to quit, he would feel the pain of being skinned and having his bones pulled out. A minute later, Tang Hua came out and glanced at Shi Mingwan. President Zhang asked you to go in. Shi Mingwan's heart was in her throat. She stood there and wanted to retreat for a moment. Xiao Qi didn't seem to notice that something was wrong with her. Then Mingwan, I still have something to do. You can do as you please. Okay, thank you. Shi Mingwan thanked him sincerely. After Xiao Qi left, Tang Hua opened the door for Shi Mingwan. Shi Mingwan stood there, closed her eyes and walked in. It was her first time in Zhang Haoze's office. The cold air brushed against her face, calming her nerves a little. Zhang Haoze's office was very large. The high space was still full of technological design. Shi Mingwan took a few steps and stood in the middle of the office. She didn't continue to go inside. Zhang Haoze was dealing with documents. It could be seen that he seemed to be very busy. There was a lot of information by his hand. Other than a laptop on the table, there was also a desktop computer. Both of them were turned on. The screen of the desktop computer was half facing the door. She could see the red and green lines on it. Zhang Haoze held a pen in his hand. He signed the document in front of him and put it aside. He didn't even raise his head. Come here. Shi Mingwan paused for a moment. Her footsteps were a little heavy. Zhang Haoze took another document. He raised his head and looked at her. Come here. Shi Mingwan gritted her teeth. She had the urge to turn around and leave. However, when she thought of the purpose of her visit today, she still lifted her feet and walked over step by step. When he walked behind the desk, Zhang Haoze seemed to be dissatisfied with her spending so much time. He stretched out his hand and pulled her onto his lap. Zhang Haoze, In front of her was Zhang Haoze's enlarged face. His dense kisses were like a net trapping her in it. There was nowhere to escape. After the kiss ended, Shi Mingwan's hands and feet went limp. Her entire body leaned weakly against his chest. Realizing her purpose for coming here, she pushed against his chest and tried to stand up. Zhang Haoze held her hand, grabbed her waist and turned her body to face him. Zhang Haoze. Shi Mingwan pressed her hands against his chest, and her breathing was a little rapid. I came to look for you for something. As Jean Hausa spoke, he held her hand in his. His calloused hand played with her fingertips one by one. It was clearly her hand, but Shi Mingwan felt like she was being played with. She wanted to pull her hand out, but he held her finger and put it into his mouth. What is it? Her finger was half bitten by him. Shi Mingwan wanted to retract it, but his grip was very tight. She became more and more uncomfortable, and her voice was a little intonated. There was an earthquake in S province. I want to go to the disaster area. But now they won't let me go. Jean Hausa stopped biting her finger for a moment. He looked into her eyes. Why are you going there? Qing Sang is there. There's still no news of her. I'm very worried about her. Her finger was bitten hard by him. She felt the pain and quickly pulled her hand back. Jean Hausa looked at her with a deep gaze. His meaning was unclear. Shi Mingwan didn't know what was wrong with him, but she wouldn't forget her purpose. I heard that you can go in with the supplies. I want to know if you can. No. Jean Hausa directly refused. Jean Hausa? I can donate supplies, but I won't let you go to S province. There are still aftershocks there. It's very dangerous. It was rare for Jean Hausa to say a string of words in one breath. His voice sounded very calm, but the concern in his words was not less. Shi Mingwan refused to give in just like that. It's precisely because it's very dangerous that I want to go. Do you know that Qing Sang is my best friend? Hua Jinyao will naturally take care of her matters. You don't have to worry too much. Hua Jinyao won't let anything happen to her. He had seen Hua Jinyao and Su Qing Sang together. Hua Jinyao doted on his wife very much. He believed that he wouldn't let anything happen to Su Qing Sang. How can it be the same? Hua Jinyao was Hua Jinyao and she was her. I can't tell what's the difference. As Jean Hausa spoke, he grabbed Shi Mingwan's hand and gently bit it again. Shi Mingwan was in pain, but this time she couldn't even pull it back. Jean Hausa, I must go. I also said you're not allowed to go. You? Shi Mingwan pushed him hard. At the same time she pulled her hand out and took a big step back. Her movements were too big and the back of her waist accidentally hit his desk. This was much more painful than being bitten on her finger. Her facial features were squeezed together. Jean Hausa quickly got up and wanted to check her waist. Where did you hit? Don't touch me. Shi Mingwan's temper flared up. She had already decided to break up with Jean Hausa. She came because she really didn't have anyone else to look for. However, with Jean Hausa's attitude, she knew that she couldn't count on him. She would think of another way. She ignored the pain on the back of her waist and turned to leave. Jean Hausa pulled her body over and fixed her in his arms again. He lifted her clothes and was about to check her injury. Let go of me. She didn't need his concern. Jean Hausa was a little angry because of her uncooperative actions. She was clearly injured, but she was still so stubborn. He pressed her body down and took a step back. She sat on his lap again. This was much more convenient. He lifted her clothes and found that the back of her waist had already been bruised. Her skin was fair and such a large bruise looked especially glaring. Jean Hausa's expression didn't look too good. He pressed the internal line and asked Tang Hua to send the medicine in. No need. He hung up the phone. Shi Mingwan didn't want to accept this favor. It's just a small injury. She still had to think of a way to go to S province to find Su Qing Sang. She struggled to remember. Such an uncooperative action made Jean Hausa narrow his eyes. Looking at Shi Mingwan, who was so disobedient, he raised his hand and patted her crotch twice. Shi Mingwan's eyes widened. She couldn't believe that he actually hit her. You, be obedient. As Jean Hausa spoke, he patted her again. Shi Mingwan's face was red. Half of it was anger and the other half was embarrassment. No matter what, she was loved by her parents as she grew up. Other than that rebellious year when she ran away from home, she had always been a good girl. Her parents hadn't even touched a single finger of hers. Who knew that Jean Hausa, this bastard, would actually hit her butt? Jean Hausa, let go of me. She wanted to get up again, but Jean Hausa didn't let her. Tang Hua was very fast. In less than 2 minutes he brought the medicine in. When he entered the door, he saw Shi Mingwan sitting on Jean Hausa's lap. Tang Hua's expression was strange for a moment, but it was only for a moment. He quickly returned to normal. He put down the medicine, turned around, and left. Before he left, he even considerately helped Jean Hausa lock the door. The sound of the door locking made Shi Mingwan inexplicably nervous. She remembered that Jean Hausa had already lifted her clothes again. He picked up the ointment at the side, opened it, picked out a little, and helped her apply it to her waist. His movements were considered gentle, but Shi Mingwan felt itchy, and her body unconsciously twisted. "Don't move." Zhang Haoze held her waist in place and held her waist with his big hand, not letting her move. Shi Mingwan forced herself not to move and let him apply the ointment for her. However, as he applied it, the movements of his hand changed. It was no longer lingering on her waist, but slowly moving down and down. It had already reached the edge of her dress. She was wearing a two-piece dress suit today, which definitely made it easier for him to move. Seeing that his fingers were about to reach inside her dress, Shi Mingwan grabbed his hand and turned to look at him. She resisted the urge to run away immediately. She stared at his face and said word by word, "I want to go to S province." Zhang Haoze's hand stopped there. Her skin was smooth and delicate, making him feel a little reluctant to part with it. "I want to go to S province." She said it again, her voice even louder than before. Zhang Haoze looked at the determination on her face, leaned over and gently bit her lips. She was in pain, but she didn't move away. Instead, she placed her hands on the front of his clothes and said word by word, "Zhang Haoze, did you hear me? I said I want to go to S province." Zhang Haoze slowly retracted his hand and slowly moved it up. Finally, it landed at the butterfly bone behind her. "If I let you go, how are you going to thank me?" The hint in his eyes was too obvious. Shi Mingwan had been with him for more than half a year, so how could she not understand what he meant? She gritted her teeth. "How do you want me to thank you?" Zhang Haoze reached out to lift her chin and looked her in the eye. "Don't break up." Shi Mingwan's face turned pale. She looked at him with a complicated expression. "Impossible. Then there's nothing to talk about." Zhang Haoze let go of her hand. "Go. I still have a lot of work to deal with." Zhang Haoze. Shi Mingwan didn't leave his lap. She was really worried about Su Qingsang. Other than this, anything else is fine. He clearly had a fiancée and he clearly didn't lack women. Why did he have to treat her like this? "I don't want anything else, just this." Zhang Haoze's words made Shi Mingwan even more discouraged. She looked at him and really didn't understand what he was thinking. "Zhang Haoze, what kind of woman do you want? Why do you have to keep staring at me?" Zhang Haoze stared at her face, gently retracted his hand behind her, and pressed his forehead against hers. "I just want you." His low voice carried a hint of heat and Shi Mingwan trembled. But you have a fiancé." Shi Mingwan forced herself to be rational and not be swayed by a few words from him. "I don't." Zhang Haoze kissed the tip of her nose gently. "I only have you." Such a Zhang Haoze was simply poison to her. Shi Mingwan trembled. She watched as Zhang Haoze's face magnified in front of her. His lips moved from her forehead to her eyelids to her cheeks and then to the tip of her nose. Finally, he kissed her lips again. She couldn't resist and there was nowhere to escape. Unknowingly, the kiss on the road to philanthropy had changed. His kiss was urgent, forceful, and full of predatory aura. She had nowhere to run. Her body was carried by Zhang Haoze. The moment she was suspended in the air, she was afraid of falling, so she instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck. She felt him carry her into a door on the side. When she entered the door, she realized that it was a lounge. The room was pure white. The room wasn't big, but it had everything. There was a bed, a small table, a wardrobe, and a bathroom inside. Her body was placed on the bed inside by Zhang Haoze. As he approached, she pressed her hands against his chest. "I want to go to S province." She said it again. At this time she still refused to give up. Zhang Haoze's response to her was to kiss her lips again, not giving her a chance to speak again. The bed under her was clearly used for a short rest. But it was unexpectedly soft. Shi Mingwan had a feeling as if she was stepping on clouds. She always felt that she was rising higher and floating further and further with his movements. That kind of floating and unreal feeling made her heart hang in her throat. She was a little afraid that she would fall. That feeling of fear made her cling tightly to him, unwilling to let go. Her actions made his eyes darken. He grabbed her waist and increased the strength of his plundering. She wanted to retreat, but he pulled her forward. There was no other way but to welcome everything he gave her. In the end, she fell into a deep sleep in extreme happiness. Although Shi Mingwan was very tired, she didn't sleep for long because she had something on her mind. She opened her eyes and realized where she was. She got up and quickly put on her clothes. Looking at the messy room, her face was a little red. This feeling was as if she had delivered it to his door. She went into the bathroom to wash her face. Looking at herself in the mirror, there was nothing wrong with her at all. After that, she was about to go out. Just as her hand touched the door handle, she heard a female voice coming from outside. Brother Hao. That title stunned her and she froze on the spot. Qin Feifei? Brother Hao. Qin Feifei had a hard time catching Zhang Haoze today. Why didn't you go to the Qin Corporation today? I've been waiting for you there for a long time. Zhang Haoze's gaze fell on the documents in front of him. He signed several documents in a row, but he didn't look at her. Qin Feifei was a little annoyed. She stepped forward and blocked the documents with her hand. Brother Hao, can't you put aside your work first? Didn't you see that I came to look for you today? In order to see her, she specially wore a new set of clothes and even went to do her hair. She had made so many changes that she thought he would see it. But he didn't see her at all. Zhang Haoze finally raised his head and looked at her. I can't go there today. I told Uncle. In fact, the Qin Corporation's business had long stabilized. Other than some particularly important cooperation and some planning meetings, he participated in the daily work. Whether or not he was there in the daily work didn't affect the results. But I want to see you. Qin Feifei's voice became more and more aggrieved. You've seen me now. Zhang Haoze's voice didn't have much impatience, but if one listened carefully, they could hear the coldness in his voice. Qin Feifei bit her lip. She stood there looking extremely aggrieved. Brother Hao, what did I do wrong? Qin Feifei bit her lip and looked pitiful. Why are you treating me like this? She leaned forward and forced him to look at her. Look at you, you've been ignoring me. Qin Feifei was really aggrieved. I've been here for so long, but you only have work in your eyes. Can't you put down your work and accompany me? She had known Zhang Haoze for so many years. For so many years she only had eyes for him. She treated him as her future husband. Everything was centered around him and she was happy with his happiness. But after doing so much, Zhang Haoze always treated her like a brother treating his sister. He was taking care of her but he wasn't gentle. He was good to her but he wasn't considerate. He still didn't know what she liked or didn't like and he still didn't know what he wanted. No, or perhaps he knew but he deliberately pretended not to know. Ever since she had confirmed her feelings, no matter how many men had expressed their goodwill over the years, she had turned a blind eye to all of them. She only had him in her eyes and she hoped that he only had her in his eyes. But Zhang Haoze didn't have her in his eyes at all. I'm busy with work. Zhang Haoze's voice was very soft. If you feel bored, you can ask Xiaoli to go shopping with you. You can travel outside and play. Anyway, you have a lot of time. Qin Feifei stood there as if she had suddenly reacted. Brother Hao, do you dislike me? Do you? You dislike me for not working and you dislike me for idling around, don't you? Qin Feifei was actually also a highly educated person. She used to study at the most famous university in Lin City. Back then, in order to catch up with Zhang Haoze and be worthy of him, who was a top student, she had put in a lot of effort. However, her health wasn't good. After graduation, Qin Yongchang didn't let her find a job, so she stayed at home. Now that she looked at Zhang Haoze, she suddenly realized that the gap between her and Zhang Haoze might be getting bigger and bigger. He might really not like herself like this. Brother Hao, I'll go to work at the company too. I'll work hard too. What do you think? Zhang Haoze didn't answer. With Qin Feifei's personality, how could she stand the 9-to-5 life of an office worker? Feifei, stop fooling around. Go home. How am I fooling around? No matter what, I graduated from a university. Qin Feifei was angered by Zhang Haoze's attitude. Why can't I enter the company? Brother Hao, do you not believe me at all? You don't believe that I can do it well, right? Zhang Haoze didn't answer her question, but his attitude was tacit agreement. Brother Hao, you really don't love me. In your heart, do you think that I'm not worthy of you at all? Do you think that I'm useless? Do you think that I'm just a social bug? I didn't say that. Zhang Haoze wanted to take her hand away and continue reading the documents. Qin Feifei was hurt by Zhang Haoze's nonchalant attitude. She felt despair. After so many years, why didn't Zhang Haoze have her in his eyes? Logically speaking, they were childhood sweethearts and had been living together since they were in their teens. This kind of relationship was naturally not something that those women outside could compare to. But he was so cold to her. She couldn't stand it anymore. She looked at Zhang Haoze's face. He was undoubtedly handsome. More importantly, there was an enchanting aura on his body that made her unable to stop even if she wanted to. She looked at him for a long time. Suddenly, as if she had made up her mind, she walked around the desk and sat on Zhang Haoze's lap. Brother Hao, why can't you see me? I just like you. Can't that be okay? Can't I like you? As Qin Feifei spoke, she put her arms around Zhang Haoze's shoulders. She leaned over and was about to kiss him. John Hausa avoided it. He pushed Qin Feifei's body away and looked in the direction of the lounge. Qin Feifei didn't notice his gaze. She wanted to kiss him again, but John Hausa pushed her away again. Feifei, stop fooling around. Fooling around? It was that word again. Qin Feifei completely flared up. She stubbornly hugged John Hausa and refused to let go. How did I fool around? Brother, how did I fool around? I love you so much. I only love you, but what about you? Why can't you love me? Why can't you look at me? Brother, how? Tell me, what else do you want me to do? She was so emotional that John Hausa couldn't pull her away for a moment. She hugged him and kissed him all over the face without any pattern. Chapter 681. John Hausa looked at the door of the lounge and then at Qin Feifei. Qin Feifei had already lost control of her emotions. Brother, how I like you. I just like you. I love you. She was about to kiss his lips again, but he reached out and pulled her away again. Feifei, calm down. I'm very calm. Qin Feifei held John Hausa's face with both hands. I'm your fiancé, but why do you never see me in your eyes? What? Brother, how? She couldn't kiss him and he wouldn't let her kiss him. Qin Feifei was in despair. She reached out and grabbed the front of his shirt. The hurt look on her face and the tears in her eyes made her look even more pitiful. I really love you, brother, how? Can't you love me? Do you love me, okay? John Hausa looked at Qin Feifei's face and finally lost his patience. When she pestered him again, he pressed the internal line. Soon Tang Hua appeared. Hua, Feifei isn't feeling well today. Send her home. Brother, how? Qin Feifei hooked her arms around John Hausa's neck and refused to let go. I'm not feeling well. I don't want to go home. You know what I mean. Don't think about chasing me away just like that. John Hausa didn't want to talk to her anymore. He waved his hand and Tang Hua understood. He stepped forward and pulled Qin Feifei's hand. Miss Qin, President Zhang still has a meeting to attend later. You don't want others to see you like this, do you? Qin Feifei stood there without moving, and Tang Hua couldn't really act recklessly. One had to know that she was Qin Yongchang's beloved daughter. Miss Qin, don't make things difficult for President Zhang, right? John Hausa looked at Qin Feifei expressionlessly. Feifei, you can go back first. Qin Feifei bit her lip. She felt that her dignity had been thrown to the ground. She looked at John Hausa and sniffed, forcing herself not to cry. Okay, you don't want to see me. You have something to do later. I'll leave. But you have to go home and have dinner with me today. Otherwise, I won't leave today. John Hausa's brows were tightly knitted. He looked in the direction of the lounge from the corner of his eyes and finally nodded. He agreed, and Qin Feifei finally felt that she was not so embarrassed. She took a step forward and stood in front of him. Brother, how I really like you. I promise you that I will work hard for you and become a better version of myself. But before that, you are not allowed to like other women. Did you hear me? After saying that, she tiptoed and kissed John Hausa on the cheek. John Hausa clenched his fists tightly and glanced at Tang Hua. Qin Feifei turned around and walked past Tang Hua. I don't need you to send me off. I'll go back myself. Brother, how? I'll wait for you. After Qin Feifei left, Tang Hua breathed a sigh of relief. He could roughly guess what was going on, so he glanced at the lounge. Then he looked at John Hausa. He was glad that the person inside was not as mischievous as Qin Feifei. Otherwise there would be a good show to watch. After Tang Hua left, the office became quiet. John Hausa walked to the door of the lounge. Just as he was about to open the door opened first. Shi Mingwan stood at the door for a long time. She didn't look at him. She walked past him and was about to walk out. John Hausa stopped her. Where are you going? Shi Mingwan looked at him and realized one thing. It was a mistake for her to look for John Hausa today. No, it wasn't just today. Every time she got involved with him, it was a mistake. She walked past him from the other side and John Hausa grabbed her hand. Where are you going? Home. Shi Mingwan didn't need to stay any longer. Can't I? Her appearance made John Hausa inexplicably panic. He didn't want her to leave just like that. Aren't you going to S province? Will you help me go? Shi Mingwan stared straight at his face. She believed that he wouldn't let her go to S province at all. John Hausa was silent. He indeed wouldn't let her go. Shi Mingwan knew that he wouldn't let her go. He was just keeping her hanging. 1-1. John Hausa. Shi Mingwan looked into his eyes and bit the tip of her tongue hard, forcing herself not to indulge in his deep eyes. I won't look for you in the future. I won't see you again. You already have Qin Feifei. So, please don't look for me. Her footsteps were firm. Zhang Hao's heart trembled. He had a feeling that he was about to lose Shi Mingwan. He hugged her from behind and hugged her tightly. Don't go. Shi Mingwan stopped for a while, then she pulled Zhang Hao's fingers one by one. Zhang Hao, don't be like this. Wan, give me time, Zhang Hao. Shi Mingwan suddenly raised her voice and struggled out of his arms. She stood in front of him and stared at his face with a burning gaze. Give you time? Tell me, how much time do I give you? A month? Half a year? A year? How much time do you need? How long do I have to wait before I can stand in front of you openly? Can you answer? She thought of Qin Feifei, whom she couldn't help but open a crack in the door. She didn't have the pride and confidence she had when she went to her studio. That Qin Feifei was a little woman trapped by love. What about her? How much better was she than Qin Feifei? For Zhang Hao, she also had no dignity and no bottom line. Zhang Hao was silent. His expression was very solemn. His lips moved, but he didn't say a word. Shi Mingwan already knew this would be the result. You can't answer. You can't answer at all. So let it be, Zhang Hao. I don't want to look like I have no dignity, and I don't want to become a lowly woman for love. If you still have a trace of pity for me, please let me go. The coldness and determination in her eyes made Zhang Hao's eyes flash with gloominess and complexity. He raised his hand and finally lowered it, clenching it into a fist. Wan. Goodbye. Shi Mingwan turned around and left. Every step she took was very firm. The moment the door opened, she heard Zhang Hao finally speak behind her. Don't go to S province. It's really not safe. Shi Mingwan's footsteps didn't stop. She left as if she didn't hear anything. She left. Zhang Hao punched the wall beside him. Tang Hua quickly came in again. Boss. He looked at Zhang Hao worriedly. Zhang Hao's back was facing him as he looked at the blue sky outside. After a while he heard Zhang Hao's voice. Make the arrangements. Go to Qing City tomorrow. Tang Hua didn't ask further. Yes, I'll make the arrangements now. In the end, Shi Mingwan couldn't go to S province. It was the most tense time for the disaster relief. How could she go there so easily? She went to the Li family's villa a few times, and Li Qinxue was also very worried. However, she also knew that she would only cause trouble if she went. At the critical moment, she could only force herself to calm down. Fortunately, after waiting for 2 days, she finally received news that Su Qingsang was fine. Only then did Shi Mingwan's heart completely relax. Su Qingsang knew that her family in Lin City would be worried about her, so she called them one by one to tell them that she was safe and told them that Hu Jingyao was taking care of her now. Shi Mingwan knew Hu Jingyao's ability. With him around, she believed that she could worry less. After she was relieved, she heard that Su Qingsang had actually chosen to stay in the disaster area as a volunteer doctor. Even Hu Jingyao stayed behind. She sighed in her heart. She really admired Su Qingsang and Hu Jingyao now. She couldn't do anything else. After thinking about it, she donated a sum of money to the disaster area. It could be considered as doing something for herself. Nearly a month later, Su Qingsang finally returned from the disaster area. Although she could contact her these days, Shi Mingwan had never been at ease. Fortunately, she had returned safely. Su Qingsang didn't stay in Lin City for long. After staying for a few days, she returned to Rong City. She could tell that after this time, Su Qingsang and Hu Jingyao seemed to have become closer. They had suddenly decided to get married. For a long time after they got married, Shi Mingwan was worried that Su Qingsang wouldn't have a good life. Now it seemed that she could rest assured. She couldn't help but think of herself again. Zhang Hao seemed to have lost contact with her for more than a month. She was relieved that he didn't come. However, she couldn't hide the disappointment in her heart. She was the one who broke up with him, and she was the one who said that they wouldn't meet again. It was actually good that things were like this now. Shi Mingwan told herself that if she was given some time, she would eventually forget about it. Even though she knew very well that it was very difficult. Time passed by for more than a month. Today, Shi Mingwan's studio welcomed another old acquaintance. Qin Feifei. She looked very different from the last time they met. Her long hair was still loose behind her head, but she was no longer wearing a dress or a suit. Instead, she was wearing a professional suit. She looked a little more mature and less naive. Miss Qin. Good afternoon. Seeing Qin Feifei like this, Shi Mingwan felt a little emotional. Love could make a woman change. Miss Qin, you look good. Really? Thank you. Qin Feifei was in a good mood today. I started to work and I found that work is quite fun. Shi Mingwan didn't reply and Qin Feifei didn't need her to. Help me pick out a dress. I'm going to a cocktail party tonight. Okay. Shi Mingwan nodded and brought Qin Feifei to the costume area. The outermost one was her first love, who had won first place in the competition. So beautiful. Qin Feifei looked at the dress. I'll take this one. Shi Mingwan was stunned for a moment. Because this dress was for the competition, she wore it last time and brought it back after attending Dixon's banquet. After it was dry cleaned, it had been hanging here as a sample. There are still 2 more in this series. Miss Qin, why don't you pick another set? After all, this set is here as a sample. Can't I sell it as a sample? Qin Feifei liked this set. I think this set looks good. I'll take this one. But, Shi Mingwan was a little conflicted. She thought that she had once worn this dress to dance with Zhang Haoze, so she didn't really want to sell it. Chapter 682. It's not about money. Shi Mingwan smiled appropriately. This is the work I won in the competition in France. I didn't intend to sell it. The work that won the prize? In other words, this is the only one? When Qin Feifei heard this, she was even more determined to win. Then I'll take this one. Miss Qin. Alright, aren't you guys doing business when you open the door? Qin Feifei looked confused. How can you not do business when you open the door? If you don't want to pay double the price, then I'll pay triple. Is that okay? Shi Mingwan didn't respond. Qin Feifei was a little dissatisfied. What's wrong with you? Aren't I advertising for you by wearing your clothes? When the time comes, more people in your studio will know about it, won't they? Do you know how to do business? Shi Mingwan couldn't argue with Qin Feifei, so she could only take off the clothes and ask someone to wrap them up. Qin Feifei swiped the card and glanced at Shi Mingwan. Miss Shi, the clothes you designed are actually quite good, but I don't think you guys know how to advertise. Next time just advertise it. Shi Mingwan didn't respond. The studio's popularity was actually quite high now. After winning the award, there were still many online orders. She was wondering if she should hire a few more people. By the way, if you have a new model next time, you can call me. As Qin Feifei spoke, she took out a business card. Okay. Shi Mingwan took the business card from Qin Feifei. On it was written the manager of the Qin Corporation's customer service department. After sending Qin Feifei away, Shi Mingwan looked at the empty model and wasn't in the mood to think too much. She asked Xiao Ji to bring a set of clothes for the model to wear. A thought flashed through her mind. If Qin Feifei went to the reception, would Zhang Haoze go? If he did, would he see that dress and think of her? Shi Mingwan, who realized what she was thinking, quickly stopped that thought. You guys have already broken up. She told herself that since that was the case, then it had nothing to do with that person. Not long after she returned to the office, someone came to look for her. To Shi Mingwan's surprise, the person who came was Wan Xianying. Why are you here? In fact, after returning from France, Wan Xianying specially came to Lin City to look for her twice. Other than coming to her house to look for her, the messages and calls never stopped. Last time he said that he had something to do in Lin City. She thought he was just joking. She didn't expect that he would really come. Can't I come? Wan Xianying handed the bouquet of roses to Shi Mingwan. This time it was a bouquet of pink roses. Every time he came to look for her, he would send her flowers. Shi Mingwan looked at the bouquet of flowers and didn't take it for a long time. Wan Xianying, I told you, I know that you don't like me, so it's impossible for you to be with me, right? Wan Xianying spoke first, leaving Shi Mingwan speechless. I'm just giving you a bouquet of flowers. You don't have to be so nervous, right? Shi Mingwan watched as he forcefully placed the bouquet of flowers in her hand. She had no choice but to take it. Thank you. You're welcome. Wan Xianying smiled. You don't have to thank me. If you really want to thank me, why don't you accompany me for a meal? Wan Xianying, no matter what, I flew all the way from Rong City to look for you. Shouldn't you show your hospitality as a host? Shi Mingwan couldn't refuse him at all. In addition, the other party was Hu Jinyao's childhood friend. In the end, she nodded. Okay. Then wait for me. I'll go change. It's okay. Beautiful women have to make people wait. Wan Xianying's words made Shi Mingwan feel uncomfortable again. She changed her clothes and came out, but the way Wan Xianying looked at her was a little strange. His gaze swept across her body, making Shi Mingwan think that there was something wrong with her. She followed his gaze and looked at herself. Very beautiful. His praise made Shi Mingwan feel uncomfortable. Let's go. Let's go. What do you want to eat? Anything is fine. Sure, Mingwan wasn't picky about food. Wan Xianying sighed. It's very difficult for me if you're like this. I'm treating people to a meal and I'm most afraid of hearing anything like that. Just as Sure Mingwan was a little embarrassed, Wan Xianying approached her and added, however, beautiful women have special privileges. Sure Mingwan couldn't help but laugh. This Wan Xianying was a very interesting person most of the time. Wan Xianying brought Sure Mingwan to Chaoan Courtyard. Sure Mingwan had been here a few times, but she didn't expect Wan Xianying to be so familiar with this place. Sure Mingwan thought that it would be awkward for a man and a woman to eat alone, but in fact it wasn't at all. Wan Xianying was a very humorous person. He talked about some interesting things that happened when he went to Hong Kong to auction antiques. Sure Mingwan wasn't bored listening. He had a good sense of propriety and never said anything too excessive or made any requests. Although he occasionally made a joke or two, it didn't make people feel embarrassed. Sure Mingwan looked at Wan Xianying and had to admit that he was a very good man. Unfortunately, she didn't have any feelings for him. After dinner, when Wan Xianying and Sure Mingwan were about to leave, they met an acquaintance. I'll go say hello. Wait for me. Sure Mingwan wasn't surprised that Wan Xianying had acquaintances in Lin City. However, that person looked a little familiar. Later, she remembered that he seemed to be in an antique business in Lin City. His daughter had once come to her studio to order a dress. Thinking of Wan Xianying's business, it wasn't strange that he knew him. After exchanging pleasantries with him, Wan Xianying came back with an apologetic look on his face. Sorry to have made you wait for a long time, right? It's okay. Let's go. After sending Sure Mingwan to the apartment building, Wan Xianying watched her get out of the car and called out to her. Aren't you going to invite me up for a seat? Sure Mingwan became nervous because of his words. I'm afraid it's not convenient. I'm joking. Wan Xianying got out of the car and stood in front of her. It's the middle of the night. Even if you let me go up, I'm afraid I won't be able to control myself. Sure Mingwan felt a little embarrassed again. Wan Xianying, I really... Stop. Today's night is very beautiful to me. You don't have to say those disappointing words anymore. Okay. I won't say it. That's right. Wan Xianying turned around and picked up a small box from the back seat of the car. This is for you. This isn't appropriate, right? There's nothing inappropriate about it. Just treat it as a thank you for accompanying me to dinner. There's no such logic. You're treating me to dinner, but I still have to accept your gift. Sure Mingwan refused to accept it, but Wan Xianying stubbornly placed the small box in her hand. Don't worry, it's not a ring. You don't have to be so nervous. Wan Xianying. Sure Mingwan pushed the box back. You really don't have to do this. I'll be embarrassed if you do this. If you really feel embarrassed, how about you accompany me to a banquet tomorrow? A banquet? Sure Mingwan was stunned. What banquet? Don't be so nervous. Wan Xianying smiled. It's the Mr. Dong I met today. Tomorrow is his father's 70th birthday. My grandfather has some friendship with him. When he saw me, he invited me to attend. Logically speaking, I should go, so can I trouble you to be my female companion? This isn't appropriate, right? How could that be? I don't think it's inappropriate. Or are you not willing to help me? Wan Xianying's attitude was too open and aboveboard. Sure Mingwan met the sincerity in his eyes and finally nodded. Okay, I promise you. Since Sure Mingwan had promised Wan Xianying, she would naturally prepare well the next day. Before she got off work, she picked out one of the dresses from the series that she had passed the semi-finals. The aqua blue gown had a calm color. It was very suitable for her to attend the birthday banquet. Xiao Ji knew that Sure Mingwan was going to attend the banquet, so she was even more excited than herself. She followed the other two assistants of the company and tormented Sure Mingwan. Her long hair was tied up at the back of her head, leaving two strands hanging by her ears. Coupled with a pair of high heels of the same color. She looked elegant and imposing. It wasn't time to get off work yet, but Wan Xianying came to pick her up. When he saw Sure Mingwan like this, Wan Xianying's gaze fell on her and didn't move away. I regret it. Wan Xianying stood there with a conflicted expression. I don't want to bring such a beautiful female companion out. I want to hide you. His words made Sure Mingwan's nervousness disappear without a trace. Thank you. You're also very handsome today. Wan Xianying was wearing a white suit today. The bow tie on his chest was dark blue. There was also a faint blue in the pocket on his chest. From this, it looked like the two of them were wearing a couple's outfit. Sure Mingwan felt that it was a little strange, but Wan Xianying was glad that he had chosen this set of clothes today. He was afraid that Shi Mingwan would lose face, so he didn't tease her about it. Let's go. Shi Mingwan was about to walk out, but Wan Xianying stopped in his tracks. He took out the small box from yesterday from his pocket. Opening it, there was a pair of blue diamond earrings inside. Look, don't we have a tacit understanding? The gown you chose is the same color as the gown I chose? As he spoke, he even looked at himself. It wasn't just the color of the earrings that matched, but the clothes also matched. In short, everything matched. Shi Mingwan couldn't answer him. Wan Xianying went forward and was about to put it on for her. There's no need, right? Don't reject me. Wan Xianying went forward and took out the pair of earrings. It really suits you. Just treat it as a thank you gift for accompanying me to the banquet. This person could always find so many reasons. Before Shi Mingwan could refuse, Wan Xianying had already put the earrings on for her. Shi Mingwan couldn't see her own appearance. Wan Xianying took a step back with obvious admiration in his eyes. So beautiful. I really don't want to bring you along anymore. What should I do? Although he said that, Wan Xianying still brought Shi Mingwan to the hotel where the banquet was held. When Shi Mingwan and Wan Xianying entered the banquet hall, there were already a lot of people there. When the two of them came in, they tried their best to keep a low profile, but they still attracted a lot of attention. The man was handsome and the woman was beautiful, but they were unfamiliar faces. They didn't seem to be from Lin City's circle. Wan Xianying's antique shop was in Rong City, but he had been flying all over the world to buy antiques all these years. More importantly, his family had a long history. Although he was young in the antique appraisal industry, he was already very experienced. The host of today's banquet, Old Master Dong, had dealt with Wan Xianying's family a lot, so he naturally knew him. When Old Master Dong's son, Dong Yi, saw Wan Xianying coming over, he immediately came over. He met him yesterday, and he was also the one who invited Wan Xianying to today's banquet. Xianying is here? My dad is talking about you. Dong Yi was from the same generation as Wan Xianying's father, so it was natural for him to call Wan Xianying by his name. Old Master Cheng is thinking about me. Wan Xianying noticed that Dong Yi's gaze swept over Shi Mingwan. He smiled. Uncle Dong, this is my female companion, Shi Mingwan. Hello, Uncle Dong. After greeting him, Wan Xianying followed behind Dong Yi to congratulate Old Master Dong on his birthday. Although he came in a hurry, he had prepared a very sincere birthday gift. Old Master, congratulations. After giving the gift, Wan Xianying had a faint smile on his face. I wish Old Master good luck and longevity. You're too polite. Kid from the Wan family, I didn't expect IE to not lie to me. You're really in Lin City. Yes, I have something to do. I heard that it's Old Master's birthday, so I shamelessly came over to ask for a drink. Old Master, please don't blame me. IE, look at this kid's mouth. It's exactly the same as his father back then. That's right. Old Master, don't tease me. When I came, my grandfather asked me to say hello to you. Okay, also say hello to your grandfather for me. Tell him to come to Lin City to play when he has time. I don't dare to say anything else here, but the air here is pretty good. Okay, I'll definitely tell him. If there's a chance, let grandfather come to Lin City. After Wan Xianying congratulated him, he introduced Shi Mingwan. Old Master, this is Shi Mingwan, my friend. Hello, Old Master. Shi Mingwan was quite generous. I wish Old Master good health. May you live a long life. Okay. Old Master Dong smiled. He looked into the distance. My girl is about the same age as your friend. Kid from the Wan family, take your friend to play. You don't have to accompany an old man like me here. Wan Xianying said a few polite words and was about to bring Shi Mingwan to the dining table at the side. There was a commotion at the door. Shi Mingwan was taken a step back by Wan Xianying. With this step back, she faced the entrance of the banquet hall. Naturally, she saw who the people who came in at the entrance were. Zhang Haoze and Qin Feifei. Qin Feifei happened to be wearing that gown. It had to be said that she looked very good in this gown. Qin Feifei's appearance was originally weak and pitiful. The light green made her look even more pure. Zhang Haoze, who was beside her, was dressed in a black suit. He was mysterious and elegant. When the two of them walked in, many people's gazes turned towards them. The two of them were quite famous in Lin City. Moreover, the news of Qin Feifei and Zhang Haoze's engagement had spread. Dong Yi went up to welcome them as usual. Before Shi Mingwan and Wan Xianying could leave, Qin Feifei and Zhang Haoze had already walked over. Shi Mingwan and Zhang Haoze's gazes unexpectedly met in midair. Chapter 683. Shi Mingwan forced herself to look away. Coincidentally, Wan Xianying was also looking at her. He leaned close to her ear and said softly, "Are you bored? It's fine. We'll leave after a while. I'll treat you to a big meal later." Shi Mingwan couldn't help but laugh because of his words. This person was really casual when doing things. He left as soon as he said he would. After being distracted by Wan Xianying, Shi Mingwan wasn't so nervous anymore. She took 2 steps back without leaving a trace and retreated behind Dong Yi and the others. Wan Xianying smiled and retreated. This way he wouldn't be eye-catching. After all, it was indeed impolite to leave without saying goodbye. Qin Feifei was surprised when she saw Shi Mingwan just now, but it was only for a moment. She was representing the Qin family and Qin Yongchang today. "Hello, Grandpa Dong." As Qin Feifei spoke, she handed over the gift in her hand. "I wish you happiness as vast as the East Sea and longevity as the South Mountain." Good. Old Master Dong nodded repeatedly and looked at Zhang Haoze. He took a step forward. "I wish you good health and a long life." Shi Mingwan was stunned for a moment. Zhang Haoze's congratulatory words were the same as hers. Although the blessings were the same over and over again, this feeling was indeed. Zhang Haoze had prepared another gift for Old Master Dong. He had also interacted with Old Master Dong a few times. It was a form of respect for him. Good. You're very considerate. Old Master Dong liked to interact with the younger generation. Looking at these young people, he felt that he was young. "Since you're here, don't stand on ceremony. You're all young people. Go and play with the young people." As he spoke, he thought of Wan Xianying. He waved his hand and gestured for Wan Xianying to come over. "Kid from the Wan family, let me introduce you. You've been in Rong City all this time, so you might not know him. This is Zhang Haoze. He can be considered one of the outstanding young people in Lin City. Haoze, this is Wan Xianying from Rong City. His Gu Langxian is very famous in the country." "Old Master, you're too polite." Wan Xianying smiled and reached out his hand. "Hello, I'm Wan Xianying." "Zhang Haoze." Zhang Haoze reached out his hand and shook Wan Xianying's hand. He didn't know if it was Wan Xianying's imagination, but why did he feel that Zhang Haoze's handshake? Wan Xianying felt a little pain in his hand when he let go. Although he knew some kung fu and usually worked out, there was still a difference between him and Zhang Haoze, who came from a real fighting background. Seeing that someone had come over to congratulate Grandfather Dong on his birthday, he took Shi Mingwan to the side to avoid them. Zhang Haoze and Qin Feifei also stood over. After leaving Elder Dong's side, the group of people inexplicably stood together again. "Nice to meet you. What kind of business does President Zhang do? Maybe we can work together if there's a chance." Wan Xianying had always been slick and never offended anyone. Among Hua Jinyao's childhood friends, he was the smoothest. "There will be a chance." As Zhang Haoze spoke, his gaze inadvertently swept across Shi Mingwan's face. He nodded slightly and said, "Miss Shi, what a coincidence." As soon as these words came out, the other 3 people present were shocked. Especially Shi Mingwan. She couldn't believe that Zhang Haoze actually greeted her. Qin Feifei couldn't help but take another look at him. Then she went to hold Zhang Haoze's arm. "Brother Hao, do you still remember Miss Shi? Wasn't your clothes designed by Miss Shi?" Zhang Haoze said it casually. When Qin Feifei appeared in front of him wearing this today, she even shocked him. He thought that this set of clothes was different for Shi Mingwan and that she wouldn't be willing to sell it. Who knew that not only did she sell it, but she also sold it to Qin Feifei. Qin Feifei pouted and remembered that she had indeed mentioned it when she was wearing this set of clothes today. She felt a little annoyed. In her heart, all women were her potential rivals in love. She really didn't want Zhang Haoze to notice other women, even if it was just a name. Because of Zhang Haoze's words, Wan Xianying looked at Shi Mingwan. There was obvious admiration and surprise in his eyes. "I always knew that you were very powerful, but I really didn't expect you to be even more powerful." Shi Mingwan was a little embarrassed. She smiled faintly. "It's nothing. There's just a specialty in the industry." Seeing that Qin Feifei and Zhang Haoze were still standing there without moving, she looked at Wan Xianying. "I'm a little hungry. Let's go sit down." "Okay." Wan Xianying nodded and glanced at Zhang Haoze and Qin Feifei. "Excuse me." They left. Zhang Haoze stood there with a gloomy gaze. Qin Feifei's hand was still hooked around his arm, so he retracted his hand without a trace. "Brother Hao, let's go find a seat and sit down." Zhang Haoze retracted his hand when Qin Feifei was about to hook her hand over again. The 2 of them went to their seats and sat down. "Brother Hao, there are really a lot of people here today. Not to mention anything else, Chen Feifei also saw Su Qinghui. One had to know that the Su family's identity wasn't ordinary. Usually they wouldn't come to a banquet like the Dong families. Zhang Haoze didn't hear Chen Feifei's words. He looked in Su Qinghui's direction. If he remembered correctly, Su Qinghui seemed to have gone out on his own. Brother Hao, are you listening to me? Eat. Zhang Haoze's voice was indifferent. Chen Feifei gritted her teeth. Today she wore a new dress and specially dressed herself up, but Zhang Haoze just didn't look at her. This made her very discouraged, and her expression became more and more unsightly. Brother Hao, she wanted to flare up, but this was someone else's place, so she couldn't go too far. She could only turn around and sulk, thinking that Zhang Haoze would coax her. Who knew that Zhang Haoze still wouldn't look at her, which made Chen Feifei quite angry. On the other side, Wan Xianying kept teasing Shi Mengwan. He was afraid that she would feel uncomfortable in such a place, so he would find some interesting things to make her happy from time to time. Shi Mengwan was so amused by him that she really forgot about what happened before. There was a smile on her face. However, she didn't know that her smile became more and more gloomy in Zhang Haoze's eyes. Halfway through the banquet, Wan Xianying left with Shi Mengwan. Before leaving, she casually looked around the banquet hall and found that Zhang Haoze and Chen Feifei weren't there. She quickly retracted her gaze and left with Wan Xianying. Wan Xianying was also a wonderful person. He left the hotel but didn't bring her home. Instead, he found a place to change out of the flamboyant gown he was wearing. Shi Mengwan looked at the t-shirt and jeans on her body and couldn't come back to her senses. Where are we going? Yes? Wan Xianying kept her in suspense. When he put on his suit and gown, he looked like a successful person. However, when he changed into jeans and a t-shirt, he looked a little unrestrained. What surprised Shi Mengwan even more was that he actually brought her to the snack stall behind the university town. When Shi Mengwan got out of the car, she thought that there was something wrong with her eyes. I guess you haven't been here for a long time, right? Shi Mengwan nodded. It had indeed been a long time since she came. She used to come with Su Qingsang. However, Su Qingsang was very busy. A medical student couldn't be compared to a fashion design major like her. She had to take a lot of exams. Even when she wasn't rushing for her thesis, she still had a lot of things to do. However, they still came here a lot of times. Shi Mengwan smelled the familiar smell in the air and really missed it. Let's go. I heard that the oyster omelette at the first stall is especially delicious. You even know this. Shi Mengwan was even more surprised now. Wan Xianying smiled very proudly. Of course I did my homework. He brought Shi Mengwan to the stall inside. Shi Mengwan looked at the familiar stalls on both sides. It had to be said that her background made her feel that this kind of environment was more suitable for her. Those banquets with toasts and fragrant clothes looked elegant, but in fact she really didn't like it. Shi Mengwan used to come here often, and Wan Xianying had also done his homework. The two of them picked some delicious stalls and ate from the street. When Shi Mengwan ate to the end of the street, she felt a little full. I'm so full. Do you want to go for a walk to digest your food? Shi Mengwan looked at the time and shook her head. There's no need, right? It's very late. I still have to work tomorrow. That's a pity. Wan Xianying sighed. I still wanted to spend more time with you today. After all, I'm leaving tomorrow. Seeing that Shi Mengwan didn't feel any reluctance to part with him, Wan Xianying clicked his tongue. You're so cold. I've said so much. Can't you pretend that you can't bear to part with me? Shi Mengwan couldn't pretend. Wan Xianying, actually you're a very good person, but... Stop. Wan Xianying stopped her. As for me, I don't think I'm a good person, so I don't need you to give me a good person card. Shi Mengwan smiled. Well, then you're not a good person, but I am, so we're not suitable. Mengwan, you really know how to hurt me. When Wan Xianying was in the direction of the parking lot, he took her in the direction of the parking lot. I'm really curious now. What kind of man do you want to be in your eyes? Could it be that you want to be a god? He had asked Su Qingsang many times, but Su Qingsang just refused to tell him, which made him extremely depressed. Zhang Haoze's face flashed across Shi Mengwan's mind. She said self-deprecatingly, no, maybe not a god but Satan. Ah. Wan Xianying really couldn't help laughing this time. What should I do? Mengwan, I really like you more and more. That's difficult. Shi Mengwan could tell that he was joking, so she also regained some calmness. Because although you're not a good person, you're not Satan. Wan Xianying smiled even more brightly. The two of them walked to the parking lot and it was almost time to stop. They got into the car. It wasn't far from Shi Mengwan's apartment. Not long after, they arrived at the apartment building. Shi Mingwan got out of the car and was about to go home, but Wan Xianying stopped her. He got out of the car and took out the dress that Shi Mingwan had changed out of at the clothing store from the back seat. "You haven't carried this yet." "Thank you." Shi Mingwan thanked him. Remembering that the other party's earrings were still on her ears, she raised her hand to take them off. "You don't have to return this to me." Wan Xianying looked at Shi Mingwan. "You've already rejected me and now you're returning my things. You're too cruel to make me think about how I was rejected by you every day. You can give it to someone else." Shi Mingwan felt rude after saying that. "But this is too expensive. I really can't accept it. Do you really have to be so polite with me? Then I really don't mind turning into Satan tonight." Since he said that, Shi Mingwan couldn't continue. She could only stop. "Thank you. I should be the one thanking you." Wan Xianying wasn't being polite. "It's not that I haven't been to Lin City before, but I really didn't realize that Lin City was so fun. So you see, I should be thanking you." Wan Xianying. "All right. Go up. If you continue, I'm afraid I won't be able to resist going upstairs to ask you for a cup of coffee." This person was really. Shi Mingwan took a step back and wanted to leave, but Wan Xianying suddenly called out to her. She stopped in her tracks, but he suddenly reached out and took a leaf from her head. "It might have been stained just now. Thank you." "All right, do you want to count how many times you've said thank you today?" He suddenly moved his face closer with a teasing smile on his face. "Maybe you can kiss me as a thank you gift." Shi Mingwan took a big step back because of his action. She didn't say thank you anymore and turned to leave. Wan Xianying looked at her back and let out a long sigh. King Xiang had a dream and the goddess had no heart. It really made him sad. He got into the car again and left. Naturally, he didn't know that on the balcony of Shi Mingwan's apartment, someone was staring downstairs. He had seen the intimate action between the two of them just now. Shi Mingwan went upstairs. Other than her bag, she was also carrying the clothes. She thought about what Wan Xianying said just now. If she hadn't met Zhang Haoze, Wan Xianying would really be a good man. Unfortunately, but tonight's date was still very pleasant. She had been very busy these days. Especially after Su Qingsang left, there weren't many classmates who could contact her, and she didn't have many friends in Lin City. It had indeed been a long time since she went to the university town. She didn't expect Wan Xianying to know. It was obvious that he came because he asked Su Qingsang. But this was considered attentive. She didn't feel anything for a man who pursued her with so much effort. Shi Mingwan laughed at herself in her heart. She was afraid that she would have to lose her memory one day and completely forget Zhang Haoze before she could accept other men again, right? After entering the door, Shi Mingwan casually threw the dress on the sofa. She didn't notice that there was a figure standing on her balcony. She was tired after a long day. She went home to relax and directly stepped on the ground with her bare feet. She was too full at night, so she stretched, put down her bag and went into the bathroom to take a shower. Halfway through the shower, she seemed to hear a slight click. She stopped and turned off the water. Just as she was about to go out to take a look, the bathroom door was pushed open. Shi Mingwan was shocked. She reached out to grab the bath towel, but she stayed under the shower. Whether it was the bath towel or the offensive weapon, they were all very far away from her. She took 3 steps to close the door, but the person outside had already come in. Shi Mingwan was shocked. She didn't have time to scream, nor did she have time to find cover. She only wanted to push the person out, but she saw the person's face. Zhang Haoze? She was in a state of shock and her breathing wasn't smooth. If it weren't for her strong willpower, she might not have been able to control her emotions. She looked at Zhang Haoze, and Zhang Haoze was also looking at her. She was covered in water, and her long hair was wet and draped over her head. Because she had been taking a shower just now, her fair skin was extremely beautiful crimson. He was wearing the suit he had worn at the banquet. It took Shi Mingwan nearly a minute to recover from the frightening environment. She looked at Zhang Haoze, her eyes full of wariness. Why are you here? Get out." Zhang Haoze didn't leave. Instead, he took a step forward. As he moved forward, Shi Mingwan retreated. However, she had just taken a shower and the ground was covered in water. It was very slippery. She retreated in a hurry and her feet were unsteady. Her body lost its balance and she fell backwards. Zhang Haoze quickly supported her waist. Before she could stand firmly, her body was already in his arms. The water droplets on her body wet Zhang Haoze's suit. Shi Mingwan placed her hands on his chest, wanting him to let go of her. Zhang Haoze easily lifted her body and tilted his head. He didn't care that her face and body were covered in water, and kissed her lips just like that. Shi Mingwan's eyes widened and she quickly struggled. However, it was useless. Zhang Hao's strength was much greater than hers, and his kiss was extremely fierce. Shi Mingwan's mouth was in pain and numb from his kiss. She was furious and she opened her mouth to bite back at his lips. Zhang Hao stepped back so that she wouldn't succeed. He lowered his head and bit her neck hard. Shi Mingwan was in pain. She wanted to push Zhang Hao away, but he didn't let go. His teeth went deep into her flesh. Shi Mingwan's tears were about to fall. Zhang Hao let go of her mouth at this moment, but he didn't let go of her. He lifted her body again and pressed it against the wall at the side. Shi Mingwan's back hit the wall, and the cold tiles made her feel cold. Zhang Hao's arms in front of her were also cold because of the water. She shrunk her body and glared at him hatefully. Are you crazy? Zhang Hao stared at the teeth mark on her shoulder. His slender fingers stroked it and pressed hard. Tell me, where did he touch you? Shi Mingwan didn't understand what Zhang Hao meant at first. Zhang Hao firmly fixed her body against the wall, lowered his head and bit her cheek. It wasn't heavy, but it hurt. Zhang Hao, tell me, where did he touch you? He saw that Shi Mingwan had already changed her clothes when she came back, and the first thing she did when she came back was to take a shower. He also saw that when they were downstairs, that damned Wan Xianying was kissing and hugging Shi Mingwan. The reason why he thought so was purely because of the angle. He wanted to go crazy, but Shi Mingwan didn't intend to go crazy with him. Crazy? Let go of me. You're not going to tell me? Zhang Hao nodded and pulled away her hand that had been covering his chest. Then I'll check it myself. Are you crazy? How could Shi Mingwan let him check? She struggled even more. Zhang Hao, let go of me. What right do you have to do this to me? Zhang Hao acted as if he didn't hear her. He stubbornly checked her body. First her cheek, then her lips. He had already kissed her just now. Now it was her arm. He lifted her arm and checked it one by one. When he saw a red mark on it, he pinched it. What is this? Crazy. Shi Mingwan refused to answer his question. Zhang Hao narrowed his eyes and lowered his head to make a mark on her arm, covering up her original mark. His movements were definitely not gentle. Shi Mingwan wanted to pull her hand back, but she wasn't his match at all. He changed her arm and didn't find the mark he thought he was looking for. He seemed to be a little disappointed. He went to check her body again. In order to wear a gown today, she didn't wear a traditional underwear. Instead, she used a bra scarf. If she wore that, it would naturally leave some marks. That circle of red almost hurt Zhang Hao's eyes. Shi Mingwan felt that he was really crazy. She felt pain and pushed him with all her might. She even reached out to hit his back. But it was useless. Zhang Hao didn't care about her ticklish strength at all. He was extremely stubborn. The water on Shi Mingwan's body quickly dried up. But the examination wasn't over so easily. She was like Jane Doe on a cross. Not only couldn't she escape, but she also had to let him examine her like this. She felt humiliated, but she couldn't break free. She couldn't get rid of him. After he carefully examined every inch of her body, he didn't seem to be satisfied. In the end, his examination changed. When her body was split open by him, her eyes were filled with tears as she glared at Zhang Hao. You're raping me. Rape? Zhang Hao sneered. He lifted her body up and put it down heavily. If you say so, then so be it. He leaned close to her ear and bit her earlobe. He said word by word, you dared to let that man touch you. I'm already being polite by not killing him. Crazy. Shi Mingwan gritted her teeth. Zhang Hao, you bastard. Change some new words. He increased his strength and his breathing became heavier. Otherwise, I'll treat this as a love interest. Unable to win against him, Shi Mingwan closed her eyes and turned her face helplessly. Everything seemed to have returned to square one. She was still the Shi Mingwan who became abnormal the moment she met Zhang Hao. However, Zhang Hao didn't notice. He grabbed her waist and pulled her body tightly into his arms. Stay away from that man. Don't see him again. Domineering, ostentatious, and full of declaration. She seemed to be able to feel his emotions and monopolize her. That wasn't love. Thinking of this, she felt even more pain. She felt tears seeping out of the corners of her eyes and falling down her cheeks to the ground. Zhang Hao was still moving. When he felt her tears, he stopped for a moment. Looking at Shi Mingwan, who had her eyes tightly closed, he suddenly leaned over and kissed away her tears one by one. This was a complete plunder. He not only wanted her body, but also her heart and everything about her. You're mine. Shi Mingwan couldn't say anything. She wanted to say that she didn't belong to anyone. She belonged to herself. But she couldn't open her mouth anymore. Zhang Haozi didn't need her to speak. He lowered his head and kept repeating that sentence in her ear. With his movements, he was bound to make her remember it. Chapter 684. Shi Mingwan had been living with Qiao Zhe for more than a year. Ever since the last time she saw Qiao Zhe fight with someone, she had never seen Qiao Zhe fight with someone again. She knew that Qiao Zhe was actually hiding something from her. But she also knew that it was his life. Even if she wanted to change it, there was nothing she could do. As long as she told herself that she didn't see it, she could pretend that Qiao Zhe was living a normal life outside. They spent the Mid-Autumn Festival, Spring Festival, Lantern Festival, and Dragon Boat Festival together. After the hottest summer in Lin City, Shi Mingwan's studies had entered the male track. She was smart and willing to work hard. Even if she stopped for half a semester, she wouldn't be unable to keep up. In the blink of an eye, it was the National Day again. After the National Day, it was the Mid-Autumn Festival. After Shi Mingwan started living with the young man, the two of them slowly lived a better life. Shi Mingwan went to school during the day and cleaned the house and did her homework at night. The young man went out during the day and returned home at night. When Shi Mingwan did her homework, he would read. Shi Mingwan once thought that the youth had always been a gangster outside, so he didn't know much. But what the youth read were history books and biographies of famous people. In the narrow living room, two people sat under the lamp, each with their own things to do. At night, the two of them had been sleeping on the same bed ever since the weather turned cold last year. Even when it was summer, neither of them said that they wanted to change places. Shi Mingwan's sleeping posture was actually very good, but it was very strange. Every time she slept, her back was facing the youth, and the two of them maintained a certain distance. But when she woke up in the morning, she would definitely be in the young man's arms. The young man put his hand on her shoulder and circled her in his arms, forming a protective posture. At first, Shi Mingwan would feel awkward and embarrassed. But as time passed, she no longer felt embarrassed. Especially after a stormy night. That day the weather was especially bad, with thunder rumbling. The thunder was accompanied by lightning, plunging the entire Lin City into darkness. In the middle of the night, the electricity went out. Shi Mingwan was afraid. She subconsciously sought the young man's embrace. The young man held her in his arms and covered her ears with his hands. "Sleep, I'm here. Big brother. I'll stay with you." The young man's voice, which had gone through puberty, was a little hoarse. "Don't be afraid." She pressed her face against the young man's chest. For a moment, his heart beat louder than the thunder outside. That steady and powerful heartbeat, beat after beat, made her completely forget the fear and terror in her heart. He had the power to calm people and she liked being close to him like this. From then on, Shi Mingwan no longer turned her back to the youth to sleep. Imperceptibly, the relationship between the two became even closer. It was almost the National Day, and Shi Mingwan's school was going to give her a 7-day holiday. She wondered if she could go out with Qiao Zhe for 2 days. She had been in Lin City for so long, but other than that time when she went out to watch the fireworks, she had not gone anywhere seriously. The youth did not object to her suggestion. He thought about it and remembered that there was a Qin mountain in Lin City. It was famous because there was a huge rock on it that looked like a zither. Shi Mingwan had heard of that place. Some of her classmates were from nearby. Because this was the first time she went out with the young man, even if it was to the city's scenic spot. Shi Mingwan was also very happy. She asked her classmates in advance how to get there. "I'll take a bus." On National Day, she prepared some snacks and drinks and went out with the young man. The scenery on Qin Mountain was beautiful. Other than the huge rock that looked like a zither, there were a few other wonders. At that time, the two of them didn't have a camera, so they couldn't take photos. However, Shi Mingwan smiled very happily and was very satisfied. Her stamina wasn't good, so she was exhausted after climbing the mountain for a short while. When the young man went down the mountain, he looked at the sweat on her forehead. He turned around and bent down, gesturing for her to get on his back. Shi Mingwan wasn't willing. "I'm very heavy. I can walk by myself. Dear brother, let's go." The young man just didn't move. He lowered his body and insisted on Shi Mingwan getting on. Shi Mingwan had no choice but to get on the young man's back. On National Day there were many people on the mountain. The young man carried Shi Mingwan on his back, but his footsteps were very steady. After coming down from the mountain, the two of them waited for a long time, but they didn't see a bus. After Shi Mingwan and Qiao Zhe discussed it, They unanimously decided to walk 2 stops to a place where there was a bus. The two of them had just walked 1 stop when they realized that they might have gone the wrong way. They were still a distance away from the real foot of the mountain. By the time they reacted, a few people had already come in front of them and blocked their path. Shi Mingwan was behind Zhang Haoze. Seeing that those people were frightened, she shrunk her body behind the young man. The young man looked at those people and narrowed his eyes. "Kid, your followers aren't by your side today, right? I want to see how you can be so arrogant today." Qiao Zhe blocked Shi Mingwan behind him and looked at the people in front of him. The corners of his lips curled up with a mocking smile. He turned around and looked at Shi Mingwan. "Go over there and hide. I'll be right there." Shi Mingwan was scared and couldn't help but grab the hem of the young man's clothes tightly. Qiao Zhe patted her hand, signaling her not to be afraid. She quickly ran to the side and hid behind a tree. There seemed to be 8 people, but the young man was only 1 person. Shi Mingwan was extremely worried. However, she saw that the young man was fighting 1 against 8. He wasn't afraid of the punches and kicks that were landing on his body at all. He countered every move. Shi Mingwan's heart was in her throat. She watched as the young man fought back. She also suffered a lot of blows. Her eyes were red. The young man's fists had been accumulated in actual combat. His fists hit the flesh and hit the vitals. 3 or 4 people had already been beaten to the ground by him. The remaining people became angrier, and their counterattacks became more and more powerful. The young man didn't notice and suffered a few more blows. Shi Mingwan became more and more worried. At this moment, a few people appeared out of nowhere. Those people were different from the hooligans just now. Each of them was carrying a stick and a steel pipe as thick as a thumb. Shi Mingwan's eyes widened as she watched the group of people rush towards Qiao Zhe and start fighting. At first, Qiao Zhe was still able to withstand 1 or 2 blows. Later, his hands and body were hit several times by the stick, and his figure began to stagger. Shi Mingwan knew that she would only cause trouble if she went over, but when she saw someone swing that long steel pipe at Qiao Zhe's head, she couldn't help but shout, "Dear brother, be careful." Her shout made Qiao Zhe avoid that blow. However, it also made other people notice her direction. Soon, a few hooligans rushed towards her. Qiao Zhe was anxious. Without thinking, he ran in her direction, but there were too many people on the other side. They surrounded him and he couldn't come over for a while. Shi Mingwan casually picked up the stones on the ground and threw the stones at them when they rushed towards her. However, she was young and didn't have much strength. Other than 1 stone that hit her, the rest of the stones were all empty. The hooligan who was hit by her was enraged. He rushed towards Shi Mingwan and threw a punch. The punch was blocked by Qiao Zhe, who was rushing over. Qiao Zhe protected her behind him. When the other party rushed over, he pushed her and told her to run quickly. Where could Shi Mingwan run to at this time? In her anger, she picked up the wooden stick that had fallen to the ground and waved it around. That kind of disorderly fight didn't have any effect at all. Soon she was surrounded by a few hooligans. The youth desperately wanted to run in her direction, but it was useless. Shi Mingwan was still beaten in the end. Shi Mingwan was a little girl. When had she ever suffered this? Her body was knocked back a few steps and fell to the ground. The remaining hooligans weren't people who had tender feelings for the fairer sex. Those sticks swung towards Shi Mingwan. At first, she could still protect her head with her hands. Later, she was hit on the head and felt dizzy. She forced herself to tell her dear brother to run. But another blow struck her on the head. She completely lost the ability to resist. The youth wanted to rush over, but a hooligan from before took out a knife and stabbed it at the youth. Dear brother? Shi Mingwan's heart was burning with anxiety. She desperately wanted to save her dear brother, but it was useless. She was hit on the head again and she started to feel dizzy. Before she fainted, she saw her dear brother dodge the knife, but he didn't dodge the steel pipe waved by a hooligan behind him. His body also fell down. Dear brother? She wanted to scream, but she couldn't. She could only let the darkness pull her consciousness away. When she woke up again, she was already in the hospital. Beside her were the worried father Shi and mother Shi. They had been looking for her for more than a year. They had even put her on the missing persons website. She was clearly in Lin City, but her parents didn't know. She didn't know how she got to the hospital. Later, she heard that someone had called the police. When the police arrived, she was already there. Other than her, there were also a few injured hooligans. Shi Mingwan was rescued by the police and brought to the hospital. They found her parents and informed the Shi couple to pick her up. When she woke up, it had been 3 days since the attack. She asked her parents where her dear brother was. But no one knew where he was. Even the police said that there was no such person. Not only that, but those hooligans also said that they had never met Xiao Zhe. Xiao Zhe seemed to have disappeared from the world. No matter how she asked or searched, there was no information about Xiao Zhe. The police even told Shi Mengwan that there was no one called Xiao Zhe in Lin City. She didn't believe it and insisted on the police investigating. They found a few people called Xiao Zhe, but none of the information matched. She could only ask the police to investigate again, but no one believed her. She didn't have a photo and she couldn't find a witness to prove what she said. Everyone only treated her as a child. After that, she was brought back to town by her parents. She kept begging her parents to let her find her dear brother. But Lin City was so big. Even the police said that there was no one, so her parents wouldn't care. No one believed her words and no one listened to them. Even if she wanted to find her dear brother, no one would help her. Most importantly, after running away from home this time, Shi Mengwan's mother was scared by her. She even ignored the fact that she only had 2 daughters and ran to have a vasectomy. She said that she wouldn't have a 3rd child and used this to beg her not to leave home again. In the end, Shi Mengwan had no choice but to listen to her parents and stop thinking about coming to Lin City to find her dear brother. However, she couldn't restrain her longing for Xiao Zhe. Every night, every sunrise, every festival, she would think of the young man who protected her behind him. That kind of longing didn't fade with the passage of time. Instead, it became clearer and deeper. She missed him crazily. However, she didn't expect that when they met again, the two of them would reach such a stage. Her dear brother had changed his name and was no longer the same person. Not only did he not care for her at all, but he also hurt her again and again. Zhang Haoze looked at Shi Mengwan, who was sleeping on the bed, and a flash of guilt flashed through his eyes. He lost control yesterday and in the end Shi Mengwan fell sick. Her body was already wet and he was so reckless. In the end she fainted because of him. Even though he dealt with it in time, wiped her hair clean and cleaned her body, Shi Mengwan still fell sick. He called her to call the doctor. She had a high fever of 39 degrees. The doctor gave her an injection to reduce the fever, but her temperature didn't drop immediately. After the doctor left, Zhang Haoze went to the bathroom and wrung a towel over her head. The towel was wet and dry, cold and hot. However, Shi Mengwan didn't wake up. During this period, Xiao Ji and Xiao Qiu from her studio called to look for her. Zhang Haoze picked up the phone and didn't care how they would react when they heard a man answer Shi Mengwan's call. He directly said that Shi Mengwan was sick and couldn't go to work for the time being. Zhang Haoze called Tang Hua again and asked him to send the work over. After hanging up the phone, he sat down by the bed and his gaze fell on Shi Mengwan. Her face was abnormally red because of the fever. Her breathing was also a little heavy. Even though she was asleep, her brows were tightly furrowed. "Dear brother?" In a daze, he seemed to hear her murmuring. When he got closer, he could hear clearly that she was calling out, "Dear brother." Zhang Haoze's eyes were deep. He reached out his hand and gently caressed Shi Mengwan's cheek. The fever was intense and the temperature was much higher than usual. The moment his hand touched it, perhaps because Shi Mengwan felt waves of coolness, her furrowed brows even relaxed a lot. "Dear brother?" Shi Mengwan felt like she had had a long dream. In the dream, she wasn't forced to separate from her dear brother. There weren't those hooligans who came looking for trouble, and there wasn't Zhang Haoze who made her sad. There was only her dear brother who had always been by her side and protected her. She dreamed that she had opened a studio and set up a company. She dreamed that her dear brother had started a business with her. She dreamed that they had been together since they were young. She also dreamed that she and her dear brother had finally gotten married and walked into the auditorium together. But on their wedding day, just when she was about to marry her dear brother, Qin Feifei rushed out of nowhere. "Brother, how is mine, you shameless mistress? You stole my man. You're shameless. You're despicable." The wedding became noisy because of Qin Feifei's arrival. All the guests who came to watch the ceremony looked at them as if they were watching a farce. I'm not a mistress. She was the one who met Zhang Haoze first. How did she become a mistress? Shi Mengwan was shocked. She wanted to defend herself, but no one listened to her. She saw her parents' disappointed faces and the shocked expressions of her friends and relatives. Even her best friend, Su Qing-sang, looked at her with pity. "Wan, give up on him. Give up on him." Those voices and those people's gazes were like knives that made her feel a lot of pain. "Don't?" She woke up with a scream but found that her hands and feet were weak. Not only that, but her entire body was covered in sweat. She looked as if she had been fished out of the water. "You're awake." A hoarse male voice sounded. She turned her head and saw Zhang Haoze guarding by the bed. He didn't look very well. There were faint bruises on his chin, and his eyes were bloodshot. Seeing him, Shi Mingwan also recalled why he was here. You, as soon as she spoke, her voice was very hoarse. Zhang Haoze brought over a cup of warm water at the right time, helped her up, and fed her to drink it. She wanted to refuse, but her body, which had just had a fever, really didn't have much strength. Her throat was uncomfortable, so she couldn't refuse. She drank all the water in the cup. The warm water entering her throat finally made her feel better. She looked up at Zhang Haoze again. Are you hungry? There's porridge in the kitchen. It's hot. Let me bring it over for you. Zhang Haoze's voice could be considered gentle. Shi Mingwan looked at him. Before she could stop him, he had already gone to bring the porridge. Shi Mingwan was really hungry. She naturally didn't know that she had slept for 2 whole days from the time she woke up from her fever. She didn't usually get sick, so when she got sick, her reaction was very severe. Zhang Haoze brought the porridge in. He helped Shi Mingwan sit up and scooped a spoonful of porridge into Shi Mingwan's mouth. Shi Mingwan tilted her head and avoided his hand. Zhang Haoze, her voice was hoarse and she looked rather powerless. Why haven't you left yet? Eat the porridge first. The spoon in Zhang Haoze's hand was still there. You've been sick for 2 days. You have to eat. Shi Mingwan's brows were tightly furrowed. With her current condition, he could naturally guess that she was sick. She didn't forget who the culprit was that caused her illness. Zhang Haoze, I don't want to see you. Get out. She hadn't recovered from her illness and her voice and face were all weak. When she said this, she didn't have any aura at all. Zhang Haoze still maintained his previous posture. Drink the porridge first. We'll talk after you finish. You leave first. I'll naturally drink after you leave. Shi Mingwan turned her face away and stubbornly refused to drink. You drink first. I'll naturally leave after you finish. Zhang Haoze's words made Shi Mingwan angry. She couldn't help but glare at him. However, even if she was healthy, she definitely wouldn't be able to suppress him in terms of aura, not to mention that she was sick now. You. As soon as she opened her mouth, Zhang Haoze fed the spoon in his hand into her mouth. She couldn't say anything. She was forced to swallow the porridge in her mouth. Before she could speak again, the second spoon had already been fed to her. Just like that, Shi Mingwan finished the bowl of porridge under half-forced circumstances. When she saw the bottom of the porridge, she also recovered some energy. I finished it. Can you leave now? Zhang Haoze put down the bowl and wasn't in a hurry to leave. Instead, he took out a tissue from the bedside table to wipe Shi Mingwan's mouth. Shi Mingwan avoided his actions. Zhang Haoze, I really don't want to see you. Zhang Haoze's hand that was holding the tissue stopped in midair. Shi Mingwan's gaze was fixed on an unknown point in front of her. Her head was still a little dizzy and her body was also soft. She couldn't exert any strength. However, there were some things that she had to say. You already have Qin Feifei. Why are you still looking for me? Not giving him a chance, she smiled bitterly. Yes, you want to say that you and Qin Feifei aren't that kind of relationship. You want me to believe you and give you time, right? But why should I believe you? Why should I give you time? You and she can appear in front of everyone. You and she can stand under the sun and receive everyone's blessings. But what about me and you? Zhang Haoze, what can I do with you? For example, on an occasion like yesterday, do you dare to introduce me as your girlfriend to everyone? Do you dare? She finally looked at him. Her voice was slightly hoarse and her eyes were dim. You don't dare. Zhang Haoze's brows were tightly furrowed. He opened his mouth to speak, but Shi Mingwan didn't give him a chance. You don't dare to let people know that I'm your girlfriend. You don't dare to let people know that there's a relationship between us. You can go out with Qin Feifei, but you can't see me go out with other men. You humiliated me and hurt me. Zhang Haoze, I'm a human being, not a doll. After saying so much in one breath, Shi Mingwan's breathing was a little ragged. She placed one hand on her chest and kept calming herself down. Zhang Haoze, the past. I can treat it as my mistake. It's my mistake. I gave you the chance to hurt me again and again. But I've already paid the price. Zhang Haoze, can you let me go? Her face was pale and she looked pitiful and weak. She was completely different from her usual bright and charming self. Zhang Haoze felt his heart tremble. He looked at Shi Mingwan and couldn't react for a moment. His surprise fell into Shi Mingwan's eyes. She thought that he still didn't want to let go just like that, and her eyes were a little red. Zhang Haoze, I'm really tired, very tired. I don't want to continue. Can I? You don't want me to fall out with you, do you? It was rare for her to be so stubborn. I think if Qin Feifei finds out about our relationship, she'll probably be unhappy, right? Zhang Hao's expression changed slightly. He thought of Qin Feifei's usual methods. What happened to that Ling Shui from before? If that happened to Shi Mingwan? He suddenly didn't dare to think any further. Shi Mingwan saw that his face was pale and knew that he definitely didn't dare to let Qin Feifei know. The corners of her lips curled up and she smiled mockingly. You can go. Shi Mingwan was really uncomfortable. She felt tired and uncomfortable. She shrank back into the blanket and turned her face away. She didn't look at Zhang Hao. I'm very tired. I want to rest. She closed her eyes. In fact, after sleeping for 2 days she didn't want to sleep now, but she didn't want to see him even more. The room was very quiet. She didn't move, and Zhang Hao didn't move either. She could feel that he was still sitting there and she felt uncomfortable. She wanted to chase him away. But she knew that she didn't have the strength now and she wasn't his match. Many thoughts flashed through her mind from when she was young until now. From when she reunited with Zhang Hao until now. Finally there was that dream. Qin Feifei pointed at her nose and scolded her for being a shameless mistress dream. Her eyes were a little sore and she felt a little uncomfortable. She resisted the urge to rub her eyes, but in the next second she felt an extremely gentle kiss on her forehead. Chapter 685. Her body immediately stiffened to the extreme, and she didn't dare to move at all. How could someone like Zhang Hao say something like sorry? For a moment she thought there was something wrong with her ears. How was that possible? She must have heard wrongly. It must have been. While her thoughts were running wild, her hand was wrapped by a thick and warm palm. The kiss that was as soft as a feather fell again. This time it fell on her eyelids. I'm sorry. Those 3 very soft words sounded again. This time they were even clearer than before. She didn't dare to move, but her trembling eyelashes betrayed her current emotions. She forced herself not to open her eyes. The excessive restraint made her hands clench into fists by her side, and her eyes were a little sore. But it was only for a moment. After thinking for a while, she suddenly opened her eyes and met Zhang Hao's. Their eyes met, and Shi Mingwan's almond-shaped eyes were cold. Zhang Hao, I don't need you to say sorry. I just want you to leave this place. Her voice was very soft, but her gaze was very firm. She really didn't want to continue being entangled with him like this. Wanwan? You can go. Shi Mingwan said those 3 extremely calm words. Half of it was because she was sick and the other half was because she was tired. She should have ended this entanglement long ago. It was just that she really missed it too much, and she was too greedy for the warmth and care that her dear brother had brought her. Zhang Hao didn't answer her. He pulled the blanket higher for her. You're still sick. Rest first. Zhang Hao, don't you understand? Shi Mingwan looked at him with a look of resistance. With you here I can't rest well at all. Zhang Hao's brows furrowed again. Just as he was about to speak, his phone rang. He picked it up without thinking much. Shi Mingwan was so sick that she was in a daze. She didn't react at first when she heard the familiar ringtone. It wasn't until the word auntie rang in her ears that her eyes widened like thunder. She wanted to sit up, but Zhang Hao was already talking to Mother Shi on the other end of the phone. Auntie? Hello. Shi Mingwan almost didn't dare to imagine her mother's reaction on the other end of the phone. Zhang Hao? She lowered her voice and gestured for Zhang Hao to return the phone to her. I'm Zhang Hao, Wanwan's boyfriend. Zhang Hao looked into her eyes and said firmly. Shi Mingwan covered her eyes with one hand. She's still sleeping. Yeah, I caught a cold when I came back yesterday. Zhang Hao had been answering Shi Mingwan's calls for the past few days. It was just that she didn't have many phone calls. Previously Xiaoji had called because she had called too many times. Zhang Hao knew that it was a call from the studio, so he answered it for her. Shi Mingwan originally thought that she could escape for a while, but Zhang Hao's words made her fall into great despair. Yes, it's my fault. I didn't take good care of her. Shi Mingwan raised her head and glared at Zhang Hao. She hated his shameless behavior to the extreme. Should I ask her to answer the phone? All right. I'll ask her to call you back when she wakes up. He didn't know what Mother Shi said on the other end of the phone. Zhang Hao glanced at Shi Mingwan. Okay, this weekend, right? I will definitely pay them a visit. Zhang Hao? Shi Mingwan's lips moved and she almost screamed. She was shocked by Zhang Hao's shamelessness. She even forgot about his self-introduction. He said he was her boyfriend? Shi Mingwan didn't have time to think about Zhang Hao's words. She was already shocked by his next words. Thank you, Auntie. Don't worry, I'll bring Wanwan back with me. Okay. Goodbye. As soon as Zhang Haoze hung up, Shi Mingwan ignored her weak body from just being sick and suddenly went forward to grab it. She glared at him. Her body was still weak, but she raised her hand and pointed at the tip of his nose. You, who allowed you to agree? This was too much, really too much. She was so angry that she didn't expect Zhang Haoze to do this. Compared to her anger, Zhang Haoze was much calmer. Auntie said that she asked me to bring you home this weekend. I don't want to. Shi Mingwan didn't want her parents or family to know about her relationship with Zhang Haoze at all. Zhang Haoze, get out. If you want to go back, go back. I won't go home with you. Not only would she not go home with him, but she even wanted to beat him up now. I'll go back? Zhang Haoze nodded and didn't seem to object. Alright, then I'll choose a time to visit auntie and uncle. Zhang Haoze. Shi Mingwan threw her phone to the side and reached out to grab Zhang Haoze's sleeve. What exactly do you want? Didn't I say? Accompany you home to meet your parents? Meet my parents? In what capacity? Your boyfriend. Shi Mingwan nodded. My boyfriend? Are you sure? Yes. There was nothing to be uncertain about. You're my boyfriend. Who is Qin Feifei to you? Zhang Haoze's expression didn't change, but a complicated look flashed across his eyes. She's nothing. Ha. Nothing at all? Isn't she your legitimate fiancée? I'm not engaged to her. That was just a one-sided agreement between Qin Yongchang and Qin Feifei. He didn't agree. If he could, he even wanted to pull out and retreat. But now wasn't the time. Shi Mingwan smiled, but that smile didn't reach her eyes. Ordinary people change their hearts, but they say that the hearts of old friends change easily. For the first time she didn't refute his words, but the meaning revealed in it was enough. Zhang Haoze looked at her and reached out to hold her hand, but she avoided it. You go. 1-1. Zhang Haoze wasn't angry at her attitude. If I leave, who will accompany you home? Shi Mingwan chuckled. She didn't seem surprised by his question at all. I don't need you to accompany me. I'll tell my mother that we broke up. Zhang Haoze's face darkened because of her words. He didn't speak and just looked at her. It was rare for Shi Mingwan not to back down. She just looked at him. Their gazes met in the air, and neither of them was willing to back down. Shi Mingwan swallowed her saliva and forced herself to calm down. Zhang Haoze, you said you wanted to accompany me home. You said you wanted to accompany me to see my family. Do you know what it means for you to go home with me? Shi Mingwan's voice was a little hoarse. Her head was still a little dizzy and her body was also soft. She couldn't exert any strength. If you go home with me, it means that you're willing to separate our identities. It means that you're willing to marry me and marry me. Zhang Haoze, she stared into his eyes, and the mockery on her lips was hard to hide. Are you sure? She didn't believe him at all. He knew. Zhang Haoze suddenly reached out and held her hand. Your body hasn't fully recovered yet. You should rest first. Zhang Haoze, if there's anything we'll talk about it after you recover. Don't avoid the topic. I won't let you accompany me back to see my parents. You should sleep first. As Zhang Haoze spoke, he touched her forehead with his hand. There's still a little fever. I might need another injection. Zhang Haoze. You rest first. I still have some business to deal with. When I'm done, I'll come and accompany you. Zhang Haoze. No matter what Shi Mingwan said, Zhang Haoze just didn't answer her question. She felt that all her strength was like hitting cotton, and it didn't have any effect. She was only concerned about being angry at Zhang Haoze's words, but she didn't notice that Zhang Haoze was much gentler to her today than before. He was also more talkative, and his face and voice were full of gentleness. Unfortunately, Shi Mingwan's mood wasn't right, so she didn't realize this at all. In the end, Shi Mingwan couldn't chase Zhang Haoze out of her apartment. Her constitution had always been very good and she rarely got sick. Therefore, she never knew that her occasional illness would be so serious. After Zhang Haoze walked over, she fell asleep again because she was too tired. In a daze, she felt that someone had been guarding her. The towel on her forehead was changed every now and then, and she felt much more comfortable. She actually knew in her heart that the person guarding her was Zhang Haoze, but so what? Nothing would happen between her and him. However, she didn't expect that after sleeping for one night, the next day the sky had changed. Yesterday, Zhang Haoze told Mother Shi that she was sick. Mother Shi was extremely worried. Although she had never heard of the name Zhang Haoze, she was worried because she had never heard of him. Shi Mingwan never told her what she did outside or who she met. She felt that Xiao Qi was quite nice to her, but Shi Mingwan didn't like him. She was really anxious. It wasn't that it had to be Xiaoqi. But if Xiaoqi could even agree to the condition of marrying into her family, then he would definitely treat Shi Mingwan well in the future, right? What about this Zhang Haoze? Where did he come from? How did they meet? How long had they been together? What did he do? She wanted to know all these questions, but Zhang Haoze didn't explain it clearly on the phone. Therefore, after sleeping for a night, Mother Shi, who was overly worried, felt that she couldn't wait for Zhang Haoze to bring Shi Mingwan home on the weekend. The next morning, the people in town happened to be driving to Lin City. After Mother Shi packed up, she told Father Shi to stay at home and take care of Shi Mingru. After all, Shi Mingwan was in the 3rd year of junior high. Mother Shi, who was about to take the high school entrance examination, didn't want her daughter to be distracted at all. She had been to Shi Mingwan's apartment before. Usually, when she had nothing to do, she would get someone to deliver things to Shi Mingwan. So she went straight to her door. When she came, Shi Mingwan had just woken up. Zhang Haoze asked someone to cook porridge. Yesterday it was plain porridge. Today he asked someone to cook fish porridge. It was light and nutritious. It's still a little hot. Be careful. Zhang Haoze brought the porridge to Shi Mingwan, but Shi Mingwan didn't appreciate it at all. I'm not eating. Take it away. Shi Mingwan, who had slept for 2 days in a row, finally recovered a little. Although she still didn't have much strength, she could get out of bed. Get out. 1-1. Zhang Haoze placed the porridge on the bedside table. The expression on his face was rarely gentle, as if he was coaxing a child. You haven't recovered from your illness yet. Eating something light will help you recover. Shi Mingwan looked at Zhang Haoze as if he was an alien. This Zhang Haoze was completely different from what she remembered. She even wanted to ask him if he was possessed. Come, I'll feed you. As Zhang Haoze spoke, he picked up the bowl of porridge and scooped a spoonful into her mouth. Shi Mingwan looked at him like this, but without thinking, she waved her hand. Zhang Haoze wasn't prepared for Shi Mingwan's attack, and the porridge in his hand flew out. The bowl shattered and the porridge splashed all over the ground. Some of it even splashed onto Zhang Haoze's body. There was silence in the air. Shi Mingwan didn't expect herself to do such a thing, and she was stunned for a moment. However, she didn't feel that she had done anything wrong. If he had left earlier and not pretended to be affectionate here, she wouldn't have done such a thing. She thought so in her heart, but it was difficult for her to maintain her calm expression. She could only turn her face to the side and force herself not to look at him. Zhang Haoze looked at Shi Mingwan like this. His gaze was deep and his expression was a little complicated. His deep eyes couldn't tell what he was thinking for a moment. Shi Mingwan waited for a long time, but she didn't hear Zhang Haoze leave in a huff. She couldn't help but quietly turn her face. Unexpectedly, Zhang Haoze squatted down and picked up the fragments on the ground. Shi Mingwan was shocked again. She wanted to chase him away again, but she saw the obvious stains on his clothes. She lowered her head again, thinking about how to get rid of Zhang Haoze, and how to make him never bother her again. It was at this time that Mother Shi came. When there was a knock on the door, Shi Mingwan was shocked. Who would come to her place at this time? It couldn't be Su Qingsang. She was in Lin City. Could it be Little Ji? Or could it be Tong Yan and Little Chiu? Shi Mingwan didn't want them to see Zhang Haoze. She wanted to get out of bed in a hurry, but Zhang Haoze pressed her body down. Don't move. There are fragments on the ground. Don't hurt your feet. Go away. Shi Mingwan couldn't sit still. I don't need you to care. Just because there were fragments here didn't mean there were fragments on the other side. Shi Mingwan stubbornly wanted to get out of bed, but Zhang Haoze forcefully pressed her body down. Don't move. He glared at her. Her stubbornness really gave him a headache. If you don't want me to do anything to you, don't move. You're shameless. I'll go open the door. As Zhang Haoze spoke, he stood up straight and walked out. You're not allowed to go. Shi Mingwan wanted to stop him, but her voice didn't have any momentum at all. Secondly, it was too late for her to stop him in this situation. When Zhang Haoze saw Mother Shi standing at the door, he recognized her as Shi Mingwan's mother at a glance. Mother Shi was also a great beauty. He could see her demeanor when she was young. Most importantly, she looked somewhat similar to Shi Mingwan. Andy, you're here? She didn't expect that the person who answered the phone would really be a man. This time, Mother Shi was a little stunned. Even though she had heard it once on the phone, it was another thing to see it with her own eyes. She stood at the door and forgot to enter. She just looked at Zhang Haoze. Why are you here? Where's my daughter? That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.